Taking out the Wanjie Rubik's Cube, he used it in accordance with the instructions given to him by Feng Qingyu. He made contact with Feng Qingyu's stepfather and streamed the video over to him. Treasure Identifier Elder, Mr. Qingyu's signal is off. What do we do? The video we have is about to run out, and every station is waiting for more. If there is no more content, we won't earn a penny. Our money will be gone, and we will have to pay fines for breaking the contract. Cold sweat was gathering on Kevin's forehead. Looking like an ant being held over boiling water, he looked over to the Treasure Identifier Elder. This plan was secret. They couldn't reveal the content. They signed a contract with different media platforms of the various high races, purchasing airtime for their video footage. Those media sources had rigid requirements for the content they put out, however. If the Thousand Treasures group couldn't put out the content in time, they were going to lose money. The Treasure Identifier Elder's phone was ringing constantly. There was no need for him to look at it, because he already knew that it was his business partners that were calling. The plan had failed. He would lose his savings, which was an acceptable loss, but there were many other people that were going to go bankrupt with him. And that wasn't even what he was worried about the most. Qingyu must know how important it is to keep the video running, but the communication has come to an end. Is he? The Treasure Identifier Elder's face was shifting through a variety of emotions. Suddenly, the Wanjie Rubik's Cube lit up. A new video was being streamed from Feng Qingyu's Rubik's Cube. There he is, and there's the fight. Quick! Record all of this footage and get it processed immediately. Kevin was so excited that he was screaming the instructions. This video is... How is he filming from that perspective? The Treasure Identifier Elder stared at the video with wide eyes. The video showed the fight with the demon spirit, but it seemed to be filmed from a first-person perspective. It was like the person filming was the same person who was fighting the demon spirit. Every detail was crystal clear. Normal people couldn't have made any sense of the raw footage. To them, it would only have looked like blurring shapes and blinding flashes of light. The video stream of the Wanjie Rubik's Cube was recorded by special equipment, and the Thousand Treasures team edited it carefully before releasing it through their media sources. They slowed it down by an order of magnitude. Otherwise, most people wouldn't have had any idea what was going on. Only someone like the Treasure Identifier Elder himself could watch the raw footage and understand what was actually happening. That Han Sen has bad luck. He hid inside the Tianxia system and kidnapped a few people to pull his boat. Then, he met a guy with a Wanjie Rubik's Cube. Now, the Extreme King knows where he is, and he won't be able to escape. They ran into a group of cloud beasts. Why did the video shut off? It's back now. What the hell? The Extreme King are fighting the cloud beasts. Holy H*T. That's the Sea Demon car. The Sea Demon car is opening. Oh, D*MN. Why is it gone? All the media channels were playing the videos the Treasure Identifier Elder was producing, all at the same time. The display drew the attention of many viewers. Because equipment inside the Tianxia system was usually affected by the magnetic storms, most films that came from the system were basically unwatchable. Capturing the Sea Demon car on film would be even more difficult. Every race was drawn by this new showcase, and viewership figures skyrocketed. Many different races populated the Geno universe, and most races had at least 1 billion members. Some of the bigger races had tens of billions. The viewership figures ascended to a frightening sum in a very short amount of time. But the moment that the Sea Demon car opened, the video went dark. All of the viewers watching became furious at the tease, and it made them want to smash their viewing devices. Because the video had been cut off before, though, they hoped it would come back and they could continue to watch. But then, some words appeared on the blank screen. This content is now only accessible on a paid channel. Please enter the paid channel to view the secrets of the Sea Demon car and the fate of the Extreme King. This is being streamed live from a massive battle in the Tianxia system. And this program is brought to you by the Hammer. Use the xenogenic treasures of the Hammer to live a good life. Motherf * King Hammer. Those money-hungry be * stards. Everyone across the Geno universe was upset about being baited into purchasing a paid channel, but still, many nobles accepted it. They paid to watch the video and immediately switched to the new channel. They didn't want to miss a single second of the action. This was the first time the Sea Demon car had been shown in such clarity and detail. Many people would have spent vast amounts of money for any scrap of information they could find on the elusive Xenogeneic, but now they only had to spend a small amount for an entire video focused on the creature. It was worth it. It was way too worth it. Real elites couldn't care less about the cost of a single, inexpensive video. Even ordinary people could afford to watch. The paid channel cost about as much as a pack of cigarettes. When they entered the paid mode, they saw the demon spirit exit the sea demon car. Then the creature blew up the Black Beetle ship and engaged Bao-Chin directly. Holy **T. The demon spirit is strong. Overwhelming. It is scary. So that's what the creature inside the sea demon car looks like. It isn't very physically large, but it's still quite scary to watch. Huh? What's going on? This perspective makes it look like someone is filming and fighting the demon spirit at the same time. Is Bao-Chin filming this? It must be Bao-Chin. Who else could film from such a perspective? Are the Extreme King in some sort of economic crisis? He is a deified elite of the Extreme King, and he needs to earn money by streaming? And he added some Mother *King sponsor and advert. How desperately do they want to earn money? Don't say that. It isn't easy to become a deified elite. While they are strong, they still require resources. Conversations about the video raged everywhere, and most people seemed to be complaining about Bao-Chin's behavior. The Extreme King themselves were quite shocked, and they weren't sure about what was going on either. They didn't know why Bao-Chin would stream this video of a battle and allow the media of all the different races to broadcast it. A first-person perspective fight was incredibly exciting for viewers. Their blood boiled as they watched. This was a deified fight, which wasn't something that usually allowed spectators. If they had been anywhere near this fight in real life, they would have run away. They wouldn't have the guts to stay and watch two godly beings fight. And even if they were ballsy enough to stay and watch, they wouldn't have been able to see much anyway. These videos had been edited by professionals, allowing ordinary people to understand what was going on. It also let them see just how powerful deified beings could be. Han Sen was watching the fight through Bao-Chin's eyes. And to him, it looked even crazier. The demon spirit was like dust on the wind. Its body was very light, and even Bao-Chin's eyes and speed could barely keep track of the Xenogeneic. Bao-Chin struck repeatedly, but he only hit the places where the demon spirit had just been. If not for the harp in Bao-Chin's hand, he would have already been killed by the demon spirit's fist. Luckily for him, his harp was able to weaken the demon spirit's speed and power. Bao-Chin's long fingers strummed the harp in his hands, and the notes he played were like waves of substance chains. They spread out through the clouds, and the sea of blue clouds moved and vibrated with the rhythm of the harp's music. The clouds weren't the only things responding to the music, either. Every substance, including sets of armor, weaponry, and Xenogeneic treasures, began to physically twist and warp under the spell of the harp's song. They became as limp as cooked noodles, waving along with the melody of the harp. The large bodies of the giant cloud dragons were deformed by the music, and with every new, twisting note, more of their bones shattered. Before long, the great dragons had been reduced to boneless meat sticks. The sight made Han Sen's scalp prickle. He didn't know what sort of sonic substance chain power Bao-Chin was wielding, but it was crushing every single thing in sight. It was way too scary. Even with that power, Bao-Chin was far from having the upper hand. That black form of the demon spirit kept flashing between the sonic forces. Han Sen couldn't see what sort of area it had employed, but the creature's powers seemed to be protecting it against Bao-Chin's deforming power. However, Bao-Chin's attacks were slowly reducing the demon spirit's speed and power. The demon spirit's eyes were like those of a ghost, and they stared unblinkingly at Bao-Chin. Bao-Chin met the gaze of the demon spirit many times, but Han Sen didn't dare use his new beast soul to jump into the demon spirit's eyes. Han Sen didn't know how strong the blood-eye evil god's power truly was, and he didn't know what sort of powers were able to restrict it. That demon spirit had demonstrated frightening abilities so far, and so Han Sen gave up on the idea of entering its eyes. As the fight went on, Han Sen quickly realized something depressing. Bao-Chin wasn't the demon spirit's equal. The monster was slowly boxing him in. Bao-Chin made many attempts to escape, but try as he might, he couldn't shake off the demon spirit. The situation was growing increasingly dangerous for the Extreme King. Han Sen was hoping that Bao Qin and the demon spirit would end up injuring each other equally, so that Han Sen could swoop in and finish them both. But it had become evident that there was too much of a power gap between the two fighters. Bao Qin didn't stand a chance of even injuring the demon spirit. If Bao Qin was killed, the protection that his eyes offered Han Sen would be destroyed. Han Sen would have to make a getaway. When that happened, the demon spirit would probably target him. Even if Han Sen wanted to make an escape now, his opportunities to do so had mostly disappeared. All the cloud beasts and Aegineacs had either died or run away. Bao Qin wasn't going to be meeting the eyes of another creature anytime soon, and so Han Sen couldn't escape using his blood-eye evil god beast soul. That beast soul could only interact with the eyes of others. It didn't have mirror powers like the ones that Miss Mirror used. If Han Sen wanted to escape unseen, he needed his host to make eye contact with another. Pang! The demon spirit landed a blow across Bao Qin's chest, tearing his armor. The godly muscles of Bao Qin's jade-like chest were shredded, and blood welled within the wound. But the godly blood didn't spill out. The blood became black, smoky dust that rose like steam. It billowed up into a small, rather unsettling cloud. Seeing the smoky, dust-like god blood, the demon spirit licked its lips hungrily and teleported over to Bao Qin. Ding! One of the strings of Bao Qin's harp broke, and a new burst of blood turned into smoke and opened like a flower amidst the clouds. Bao Qin isn't going to survive this. Han Sen made his decision. He turned off the Wanjia Rubik's Cube, and when the injured Bao Qin met the gaze of the demon spirit, he jumped into the demon spirit's eyes. Please let this work, Han Sen prayed desperately. The eyes of the demon spirit were like the soulless eyes of a shark. They were red like fire. They looked rather transparent. Han Sen didn't know if the blood-eye evil god beast soul could find refuge within them. In the next second, Han Sen realized that his vision had indeed changed. When he realized that he was looking directly at the injured Bao Qin, happiness and relief flooded through him. He knew he was now residing inside the eyes of the demon spirit. Looking out from the demon spirit's eyes was different than Han Sen had initially imagined it would be. Because the demon's eyes were so red, Han Sen had thought that looking through them would provide a view that was tinted and murky. But instead, the view from the demon's eyes was actually entirely black and white. Everything Han Sen could see was a blur of various shades of gray. It took Han Sen only a moment to realize that his eyes couldn't keep up with the eyes of the demon spirit. He used his purple-eye butterfly to lessen the disparity between his vision and the demon spirits, and the images before him quickly resolved. Unless he had the purple-eye butterfly active, it was like looking out of a high-speed train with an extremely narrow field of view. Everything he saw on the outside zoomed by at incredible speed, and objects became blurry and difficult to make out. With the purple-eye butterfly, though, Han Sen could see everything. The demon spirit hovered in front of Bao Qin. Every string on the man's harp was broken, and the demon spirit's ghost-like hands then went through the harp to pierce right into Bao Qin's chest. The smoke from Bao Qin's deified blood was spreading. Bao Qin gritted his teeth, and his body released a very bright light. The man's fingers reached for the stringless harp. Then, some invisible strings appeared beneath his fingers. Every string released a weird sonic power that tore through space to create a giant space vortex. The vortex pulled in the nearby clouds, and then it began to pull on the demon spirit and Bao Qin himself. In order to resist the force of the vortex, the demon spirit had to teleport away. Bao Qin's body, on the other hand, was sucked into the space vortex. After a short amount of time, the space vortex disappeared. The demon spirit grunted coldly. It turned around and returned to its sea demon car. The giant cloud dragons were all dead, so the carriage was simply hanging in place. The demon spirit waved its hand, and the cloud sea began to roll. The clouds became tornadoes that drew in and consumed even more clouds. Soon, the tornadoes transformed into new cloud dragons that flew over to the sea demon car. Han Sen was frozen. The powers and techniques of this demon spirit were crazy. It was difficult for Han Sen to comprehend the power it must have taken to summon so many cloud dragons so quickly. I cannot let him find me. Even blinding him wouldn't be enough to let me escape successfully, Han Sen believed. The demon spirit was back inside the sea demon car. The carriage turned and headed for the deep sea of the clouds. The xenogeneics and cloud beasts all around were now dead. All that remained was the carriage that the demon spirit traveled in. The sea demon car had remained undamaged through the entire fight. Han Sen couldn't imagine what material it must have been made of. Han Sen wanted to use the eyes of the cloud dragons to leave, but the cloud dragons didn't dare to look directly at the demon spirit. The demon spirit didn't look at them either, and so Han Sen couldn't find the opportunity he needed. There is no need to worry. As long as the demon spirit doesn't notice me, he will eventually look into the eyes of another creature. Sooner or later, I will be able to escape. As the demon spirit continued to remain oblivious to Han Sen's presence, Han Sen finally began to relax. Inside the stone carriage, the demon spirit stared forward without closing its eyes. Perhaps the creature's eyes simply couldn't be closed. As he looked through the eyes of the demon spirit, Han Sen could see the interior of the stone carriage. Words were written across the stone walls. Because the demon spirit's vision was completely black and white, Han Sen couldn't tell what the true colors of the words were. Most things that Han Sen looked at were represented by gray tones. The words had been written in a tiny script, and each letter was no bigger than a fly. But when Han Sen looked closer, he realized that the words were all ancient and strong. It was like there was an infinite, amazing universe residing within them. Han Sen was happy. He assumed it was some high-class Geno art, but it was written in the common language of the universe. Since it was written in a language he knew, it would be easy for him to remember. But when he looked a little closer, he realized the words weren't a Geno art. In fact, their content was confusing, almost nonsensical. Han Sen couldn't see where the writing began. The writing seemed to run across multiple walls of the carriage, but because the demon spirit was turning his head, Han Sen could only see the wall that was directly in front of him. Getting my wish by using your love. I'm so sorry. I could then make the wish again, to bring love back to life, but I would accept grand suffering. That is the reason I turned into a demon, and I was unable to continue with the relationship. I want to end this life, but it is very difficult. Han Sen read it all out, stopping when he reached the end of what he could see. Did the person who wrote this down make a wish to a god, then regret that wish? Who is the person making wishes? I cannot believe he tried to make a wish twice. Normal people only make one wish and suffer as a result, but this guy made 2 wishes. A wish to become a demon? Is the demon spirit the one who wrote this? Han Sen was confused. It was almost unthinkable, but based on what Han Sen knew, it seemed most likely that the demon spirit had been the one who wrote on the walls. Who else could have written something on the interior of the sea demon car? It's a shame I cannot see the full contents. If I could, I would be able to understand the cause and the consequences. If this demon spirit really is the person that the text mentions, then he must have been someone awesome before he became the demon that he is today. As Han Sen kept thinking to himself, the demon spirit's vision moved. The demon spirit glanced to his left, and Han Sen followed its gaze. There was something carved on that wall as well, but the demon spirit's vision didn't linger on the words. It looked away quickly, and Han Sen didn't have time to read the words. When the demon spirit turned in a different direction, though, Han Sen made out the image of a woman. The picture was very simple. It was only a few lines, but it was enough to draw out the figure of a long-haired woman. There was no face, but the figure alone was enough to let Han Sen know that she had been beautiful. The demon spirit looked upon the image of the woman carved into the stone. He slowly reached out and touched the stone, but his hands were like dust. When he touched the stone, his fingers spread out like smoke. The demon spirit continued to reach for the woman's image, but every time he touched it, his hand disappeared in a puff of dust, and when he pulled his hands away from the stone tablet, his dust-scattered hands coalesced again. For some reason, Han Sen felt a knot form in his throat. The scene moved him more than he had expected. The demon spirit reached out many times, trying in vain to brush his fingers over the picture, but he eventually gave up. Instead, he just stared at the picture of the woman on the stone wall. He spaced out looking at it. Han Sen could see there were a few small words next to that picture of a woman. When he focused, he could read what was written. I will not age for 300 million years, but even so, I will never be able to touch your face again. As Han Sen read that line of words, the sickening feeling sank deeper and deeper in his stomach. He wasn't a fan of tragedies, but just seeing those words allowed him to understand what sort of tragedy he was looking at. The demon spirit tipped his head to the side, so he could just stare at the woman's picture. He didn't move, and time flowed by unnoticed. At least an hour passed in this motionless state, and the sea demon car continued to more steadily forward the whole time, pulled by the giant cloud dragons that the demon spirit had summoned from the clouds. Even if Han Sen wanted to escape, there was no way he could right now. He had no choice but to wait. Fortunately, I sent the little red bird with Bauer. If the little red bird was trapped here with me, Bauer would be in danger, Han Sen thought to himself. Han Sen didn't know when the demon spirit would exit the sea demon car again. Han Sen noticed that nothing he did in the demon spirit's eyes seemed to draw its attention. So, he summoned Warner, who he had placed inside Destiny's tower. Warner had been in a coma all this time, and she hadn't woken up. Han Sen couldn't hold her in his arms all day every day, and so, he had placed her inside Destiny's tower. Han Sen's Sea of Soul hosted Destiny's tower, and Warner hadn't turned blonde the entire time she was inside. If I cannot find a chance to escape, I might need Warner's power. Han Sen checked her status, and he noticed that she had recovered somewhat. Although her body was still rather weak, it wasn't abhorrently faint like it had been. There was no chance of her suddenly giving up the ghost. It really was the blonde hair mode that brought her so close to death. She recovers as long as her hair stays black, but she's healing so slowly. If this keeps going, who knows how long it might take for her to return to normal again. Han Sen tried to send his power into her, but it didn't seem to work. He could put his power into Warner's body, but her body didn't absorb the energy. It was like pouring water into a cup full of holes. No matter how much power he put in, it would just leak out. There was nothing he could do, so he put Warner back inside Destiny's tower. He used the Wanjia Rubik's Cube to contact the Treasure Identifier Elder. When the video transmission stopped for the final time, it hadn't affected the Treasure Identifier Elder too much. They had already earned the money they needed to. Their profits might not have been maximized, but their earnings were still substantial. Many creatures had wanted the video to keep going, but the Treasure Identifier Elder had no more footage, so they had stopped the stream. When Han Sen contacted the Treasure Identifier Elder again, the Treasure Identifier Elder was alone in his room. When the old man saw that it wasn't Feng Qingyu contacting him via the Wanjia Rubik's Cube, he frowned and asked, "Where is Qingyu?" "Don't worry, Treasure Identifier Elder. Qingyu is fine, but I was separated from him. Is there a way for me to contact him and the others?" This was why Han Sen was contacting the Treasure Identifier Elder. The Wanjia Rubik's Cube is an important possession of the 1,000 treasures. Only Elder members are allowed to have them. Qingyu's Wanjia Rubik's Cube is mine, and he only has one. If you have the Wanjia Rubik's Cube, there is no way to contact them while they remain in the Tianxia system. The Treasure Identifier Elder paused and asked, "Do you know where they are? I can send people to the Tianxia system to extract them." Han Sen didn't say anything. If he had been with Feng Qingyu, he would have given their location to the Treasure Identifier Elder. But Bauer and the others were with him, and Han Sen didn't trust this man with their safety. The Treasure Identifier Elder was smart. He knew what Han Sen was worried about. After a moment of thought, he said, "Actually, even if we went out to find them, I doubt that we could. The Extreme King elites and many others wish to capture you and haul you back to the Extreme King. They should be in the Tianxia system already. It is too late for a traditional search and rescue party. If you want your friends and Qingyu to be saved, there is one other way." "You're saying that I should use the Wanjia Rubik's Cube to leak my location?" Han Sen immediately understood what the Treasure Identifier Elder was implying. The Treasure Identifier Elder nodded and said, "Yes. The Extreme King have come looking for you, not your companions. If you keep letting them know where you are, they won't have any reason to conduct a general search that might endanger Qingyu and the others." "I'll think about it." Han Sen turned off the Wanjia Rubik's Cube. What would be the point of using the Rubik's Cube now? He was inside the eyes of the spirit demon. If he began streaming video, people would only see the interior of the stone carriage. That wouldn't be very helpful for anyone. Han Sen needed to wait for a moment when a video stream would tell the Extreme King exactly where he was. Only then would it be worth turning the Rubik's Cube back on. I really hope that the demon spirit is planning to leave the sea demon car soon. If he decides to stay in here for a few hundred years, that will be bad, Han Sen thought morosely. Luckily, Han Sen's worries didn't jinx his situation. Despite the time he spent envisioning the worst-case scenario, it didn't come to pass. After another half-day of travel, the sea demon car came to a stop. The spirit demon finally turned its eyes away from the wall of the carriage. The creature pushed the door open and slid out. He's finally out. Han Sen was filled with happiness, but when he saw what was outside the carriage, he froze. Before he entered the Tianxia system, Han Sen had done a lot of research about the place. He had learned that the system was filled with clouds and fog, but no planets were known to exist within it. But as the demon spirit moved out of the carriage, Han Sen saw a giant island hanging in the clouds. The clouds surrounding them were pure white now, unlike the blue clouds that Han Sen had seen last. These fluffy white clouds looked like they belonged in an ordinary sky. The demon spirit dropped onto the grass of the island. The fresh green grass turned to dust the moment that the demon spirit touched it. The dust rose and danced around the feet of the spirit demon, like ashes rising from a disturbed grave. When he fought, the demon spirit moved so quickly that it looked like he was teleporting. In this place, though, he walked forward as slowly as a normal person would, heading for a mountain at the center of the island. The small mountain wasn't high, probably only reaching 400 meters at its peak. Han Sen could have jumped over such a small mountain in a single leap. The demon spirit could probably have done the same with only a thought. But instead, the demon spirit was walking up the mountain, step by step. He moved patiently, almost methodically. What is he trying to do? Han Sen wondered curiously. Although he wanted to flee, there were no creatures whose eyes he could jump into. The island was covered in grass and dotted with strange flowers, but there were no creatures to be seen. The demon spirit left the sea demon car behind without so much as a backward glance at the cloud dragons. Because of that, Han Sen couldn't even escape by jumping into the eyes of a cloud dragon. Since he couldn't run, Han Sen spent his time trying to guess what the demon spirit would do on the mountain. He had too little information to come up with any truly plausible theories, though. When the demon spirit reached the mountain's peak, Han Sen realized that the mountaintop was flat. It was about the size of a basketball court, and there was a building standing at its center. The building had 2 floors, and it appeared to have been constructed out of a beautiful variety of wood. The building was surrounded by ornately fenced gardens. The gardens were full of greenery, but they weren't beautiful or well kept. They were quite ugly, and only the walls that enclosed them were nice. A wooden gate provided an opening in the fence. As they approached the gate, Han Sen saw a plank of wood stuck in the earth. 3 words were written down on it: "No love house." No love house? What does that mean? Han Sen wondered. The demon spirit drifted to a stop just outside the fence. The wooden door wasn't locked, but he seemed to have decided against going into the yard. He stood outside the fence, looking toward the window on the 2nd floor. Han Sen thought the demon spirit might do something interesting, but he just stood there for about an hour. He didn't move an inch. "Purple Fight, what are you doing here?" "I don't want to see you," said a woman's voice from the 2nd floor. Her tone was hard and distant. The demon spirit stayed where he was. He didn't move, and his eyes remained locked on the 2nd floor window. The woman inside the wooden house pushed open the window and looked at the demon spirit angrily. She gnashed her teeth and said, "Get lost. I don't want to see you again. Either grant me that wish or just kill me." Han Sen, hearing the name Purple Fight, thought it sounded very familiar. After he searched his memory, he placed the name. His eyes and mouth opened wide in shock. "This name is like a clap of thunder in my ear." One of the 10 generals of Sacred was the invincible General Purple Fight. Han Sen had spent a lot of time researching Sacred. After his fight with the purple-eyed butterfly, he carefully researched each of the 10 generals. Ultimately, however, he wasn't able to learn much about them. But from the little information he had gathered, this General Purple Fight had struck him as being quite impressive. He was invincible even when fighting alone, which earned him the nickname, the Invincible Solo. The name perfectly captured how frightening General Purple Fight was. There was a legend that said before Purple Fight became a general, He was an enemy of Sacred Leader. At one point, Sacred Leader himself lost in a one-on-one fight against Purple Fight. That was why Purple Fight earned the title Invincible Solo. After that, Sacred Leader used some sort of trick to beat Purple Fight and claim ownership over him. Purple Fight became the strongest of Sacred's 10 generals. Is this demon spirit General Purple Fight? Han Sen found it hard to believe. Out of the 10 generals, General Ghostbone was the best when it came to leading armies, and Purple Eye Butterfly was the leader of intelligence gathering. But when it came to fighting alone, Purple Fight was the greatest. In a one-on-one deathmatch, the leaders of the 3 highest races of the universe couldn't defeat him. The demon spirit saw the woman looking down on him, but he didn't say a word. He merely returned her gaze. Han Sen hesitated. He didn't know if he should stay in the demon spirit's eyes or make the jump into the woman's eyes. The woman continued to send a string of blistering invectives and insults toward Purple Fight, but the demon spirit merely looked at her without moving. He didn't react to her words, and it was almost as if he wasn't getting scolded at all. That made Han Sen wonder if the demon spirit wasn't actually the Purple Fight the woman mentioned. When that woman grew tired of yelling, the demon spirit brought out an item. It appeared in the demon spirit's shadowy hand out of nowhere, and he carried it to the gate. He didn't touch the wood or the fence. When Han Sen saw the item that the demon spirit had set on the ground, his eyes brightened. It was a book. The book was made of stone, and there were 7 words written upon the cover. Shocking World Record of the Extreme King. Holy *T. That is the Extreme King's exclusive Geno art. How did the demon spirit get a hold of it? Right, he must have gotten it from Bao Qin. Bao Qin must have had it somewhere on his person when he fought the demon spirit, Han Sen thought. When the woman saw the shocking world record of the Extreme King, she looked even more distraught. She screamed, "Purple Fight! What is the point of you bringing me all the Geno arts in the world? They are meaningless to me. Either kill me or let me go." Han Sen was hesitant. He didn't know if he should stay in the demon spirit's eyes or jump to the eyes of this woman. From what the woman had said, he could guess that she had been imprisoned in this house by the demon spirit. If Han Sen leaped into her eyes, even if she never discovered his presence, there was a chance he might never leave that place. But if he stayed inside the eyes of the demon spirit, who knew how long he would have to remain inside the sea demon car? Twiddling his thumbs in the sea demon car for a few hundred years would be a pretty miserable fate. The woman should be easier to deal with than the demon spirit. Even if I'm discovered, it won't be as difficult to escape. Han Sen could feel that the demon spirit was on the precipice of leaving. Putting away his hesitation, Han Sen reflected himself into the eyes of the woman before the demon spirit had a chance to break eye contact. With the woman's curses still echoing around him, the demon spirit walked back down the hill away from the house. As he watched the demon spirits receding back, Han Sen felt rather glum. Finally, back to normal. With the woman's vision, Han Sen could finally see colors again. It was a relief to have normal vision after being stuck in the monochromatic eyes of the demon spirit. When the woman saw that the demon spirit had finally left, she stopped swearing. Then, she turned away from the window. The woman glanced around, and as she did, Han Sen followed her gaze. The interior of the house was packed with bookshelves, and the bookshelves were all lined with books. The woman's eyes moved too quickly, however, which kept Han Sen from being able to read the titles on the books. The woman walked downstairs and left the house. Despite her earlier anger, the woman walked over to the book that the demon spirit had left on the grass and picked it up. When she returned to the house, the woman threw the shocking world record of the Extreme King on the floor. She stomped on it many times, discharging some of her leftover anger. A while later, the woman picked up the shocking world record of the Extreme King. She used a cloth to clean it, then placed it on a bookshelf. The woman grew restless after that. She stood up and moved back to that same bookshelf, repositioning the shocking world record slightly. Does this woman have OCD? Han Sen thought that the woman was a bit weird. There were no other creatures on this mountain, only this one woman living alone in a wooden house. Han Sen wanted to escape her eyes, but it appeared as if doing so would be impossible. I don't know what this woman is capable of. If her power is average, I can just wait until I'm sure that the demon spirit is gone. Then I can race out of her eyes to make an escape. In preparation for that eventuality, Han Sen paid careful attention to the woman. The woman was definitely strange. When she was done fiddling with the book, she went to sit at the window and peer outside. Han Sen realized that the clouds outside the island weren't white anymore. They were light yellow like butter. Han Sen was happy. He brought out his Wanjie Rubik's Cube and filmed what could be seen from the window. He then sent it to the treasure identifier elder. "Didn't you want to capture me and claim the bounty on my head? Come and try it," Han Sen said to the Rubik's Cube after he made the film. After the treasure identifier elder received the footage from Han Sen, he edited the clip and began streaming it. Han Sen didn't know what effect this play might have, but for now, it was all he could do. Thankfully, the wooden house didn't have any mirrors or swords. Otherwise, if she looked into a mirror and noticed that her left eye was red, she'd realize there was a problem. The woman sat in front of the window for a long time. Han Sen didn't know what she was thinking about, and he was starting to believe that she'd never move again. But after a while, the woman finally moved. The woman sighed deeply. She stood up and moved toward a desk. The desk was laden with stacks of books and documents. There were no tools that required electricity, but perhaps that was due to the magnetic storms that plagued the Tianxia system. Electric instruments probably wouldn't work here anyway. The woman's room was organized with the same fastidious attention to detail as the rest of the house. The items on the table were arranged tidily, and her books and notebooks were all lined up perfectly. All the pins were in the pin cup. The woman had serious OCD issues. When she sat down in front of the desk, she picked up the top notebook. She opened the notebook and flipped to an empty page. After a moment of thought, the woman wrote something down on the empty book. She assembled words, numbers, and symbols into a variety of formulas that Han Sen was unable to comprehend. Han Sen didn't know what the woman was doing. The woman wrote with repeated breaks for thought. Before long, she picked up a book from the bookshelf. She flipped through it quickly, apparently trying to find something specific. Phenomenon? Isn't that the Geno art that is similar to Sky Palace's textless book? Han Sen thought in surprise. Phenomenon was a secret skill of Sky Palace, as well. What happened next surprised Han Sen even more. The woman kept pulling down and perusing different books, and those books were of the top Geno arts exclusive to a variety of different races. Many of them were guarded with the utmost secrecy. Han Sen saw the destroyed Geno art 3 bodies, 1 destroyed Chaos Godlight, and the dragon's Evil Breaker dragon presence. Many other famous Geno arts that were known across the Geno universe were there, as well. There were also many names that Han Sen had never even heard before. Who is this woman? And why does she have so many secret Geno arts here? Surely the spirit demon didn't steal them all just for her, right? That should be impossible. Those races wouldn't hand out their secrets for free. How many elites would really bring their secret Geno arts to Tianxia system just to get mugged? Han Sen couldn't make sense of the situation. But as he watched, Han Sen soon realized what she was doing. She was obviously researching the Geno arts. Because he didn't know what she was writing, though, he couldn't understand the research she was doing. It was like when normal people made use of computer software. Although people might use a program every single day, if they saw a coder working on that same program, they wouldn't have a clue what they were seeing. Unless Han Sen could see the Geno arts she was researching, he wouldn't have a single clue to figure out what he was seeing. The symbols and formulas weren't enough for him to tell what she was working on. No, this won't work. If I keep it complete, no creature will be able to reach the required fitness level. Lowering the fitness requirements will dismantle the skill, so that would be useless. How do I keep it complete and also lower the fitness requirements for practice? The woman mumbled to herself. She was putting an almost painful level of focus into the problem, but she couldn't seem to come up with any solutions. She grappled with the problem for a while longer, but she still couldn't figure it out. She walked over to the bookshelf, pulled down the shocking world record, and began reading through it. The shocking world record of the Extreme King. In the beginning of the Extreme King, the sky and ground welcomed this race, the woman said, reading the prologue in a smooth voice. She broke off, and a scornful chuckle rolled out of her throat. Very presumptuous. He was just a slave of sacred leader, so how dare he say that? It seems as if this woman is connected to the sacred leader somehow. It also looks like the Extreme King's alpha once belonged to Sacred, maybe as a low-level servant. Han Sen thought in surprise. The woman continued to read the shocking world record, and after a while, she started to look annoyed. I thought this would be something special, but it's just a half-asterisk said version of Sacred Leader's blood spirit body. And this guy has the nerve to call it a king body? Very funny. Han Sen's eyes widened even further. No way. The Extreme King's king bodies were invented by the Sacred Leader. The woman looked at the book in her hands with distaste, but she continued to read it all the way through. As her eyes moved along the pages, Han Sen read the entirety of the shocking world record with her. Although this manuscript wasn't the original copy, it still had the exact same contents as the original shocking world record. It was a very powerful and multifaceted Geno art. It had everything a person could want in it. If a member of the Extreme King had a king body of their own, they could find a skill to learn within the shocking world record. This slave stole my Geno world speech. He was kind of smart, honestly. He combined the Geno world speech with a blood spirit body. But the Geno world speech and the blood spirit body were each only half finished. No matter how they are combined, they won't reach the final stage. The woman had lost her interest in the shocking world record of the Extreme King. She placed it back on the shelf. Han Sen was frozen, and he thought, this woman doesn't look too old, but she speaks as if she was alive in Sacred Leader's day. Is such a thing possible? How has she survived for such a long time? Can't blame the slave, the woman said with a sigh. He couldn't bring himself up to the super gene level. Even the Sacred Leader and I failed continually, and he was just a slave with a slightly abnormal amount of intelligence. His achievements were respectable, all things considered. She proceeded to sit down on a chair. Han Sen's heart shook. What the hell? Is the super gene she mentioned related to the sanctuary somehow? The woman glanced through her notebook in boredom. She closed it and put it back. Then she sighed again. There are no clues to follow. I can't figure out why this story of genes can't be practiced, but lowering the practice requirements will make it impossible to generate a super gene. What am I supposed to do? Han Sen's throat had tightened into a knot, and he wanted to scream. The story of genes. She's researching the story of genes? Who is this woman? Maybe the Sacred Leader was correct. It's simply impossible to determine the faults in some genoarts. We need to find a way for creatures, genes to evolve more quickly. If we can hasten the speed at which genes evolve. But in that case, why would we need the story of genes? That way won't work. The woman shook her head tiredly. Han Sen's heart was like a sea tossed by a violent storm. It was full of scary waves and rattling winds. If what the woman said was true, she might have been the person who actually created the story of genes. She might have had a direct connection to the Sacred Leader, and maybe she even knew him personally. Han Sen wanted to run far away from this terrifying woman, but he wanted to find out her secrets even more. But he couldn't tell what level the woman might have been. If Han Sen could, he would have liked to tie the woman up and interrogate her until he had extracted every last bit of info she had to give. But considering that the woman might have hailed from the same era as the Sacred Leader, he shoved that thought away before it led him into doing something rash. There were too many unknowns here, but the bits and pieces he was putting together told him that if he challenged this woman, he could be in grave danger. If she had conducted research alongside Sacred Leader and considered the Extreme King as little more than servants, her power had to be substantial. Perhaps she wasn't as strong as Purple Fight, but there was a high chance of her being a top-class deified. Han Sen wasn't confident that he could take on someone like that. If he revealed himself, he might be the one getting interrogated. Han Sen had to be patient. If the woman continued to talk to herself, she might reveal more secrets out loud. But she didn't talk to herself every day. Sometimes, she wouldn't say a single word, but whenever the demon spirit paid a visit, she seemed to blow a fuse. After screaming and cursing at the demon spirit until he left, she would talk to herself for the rest of the day while she cooled off. But she didn't voice any more secrets. The woman spent most of her time researching the story of genes. She used any genoart she was able to get her hands on to test and modify it. She tried many different methods, but none of them seemed to stick. As the woman worked in her notebook, Han Sen could see the story of genes. After a brief examination, He confirmed that it was truly the same Geno art that he possessed. There were some differences, though, because this woman's The Story of Genes had some modifications. Some parts of the Geno art were more advanced than Han Sen's version, but there weren't many differences. Clearly, The Story of Genes had been completed a long time ago, but since practicing The Story of Genes in its original form was simply unfeasible, modifications had been required. In addition to the original version, the woman had experimented with hundreds of altered variants of the Geno art. The woman had made each version unique in some way, hoping to find a new form of the Geno art that was superior to the original. None of the attempts succeeded, though. All the variants were, at the end of the day, failed experiments. Han Sen himself had practiced The Story of Genes. When he first started attempting to use the Geno art, his fitness level had been far too low to actually practice the skill. But with the help of the black crystal armor, he was eventually able to perform The Story of Genes. Han Sen had spoken to Professor Bai Yishan about the Geno art. No ordinary being could practice with The Story of Genes because the fitness requirements were too dizzying to comprehend. The only way it could be learned, supposedly, was to have a body as perfect as a god's. Normal people had flaws in their bodies, and even minuscule flaws would make the Geno art unlearnable. Han Sen watched the woman conduct research every day. Although she wasn't making any progress, Han Sen started to gain a much deeper understanding of The Story of Genes. There were many things he had never fully understood in the past, but now they had become clear. While Han Sen was enjoying his newfound knowledge, the woman walked out of the wooden house. She went to a pool in the garden. She crouched down, and it appeared as if she was going to take a sip of the water. But when she saw her reflection, she froze. Oh no! Han Sen got a shock suddenly. The woman looked into her reflection in the pool. Her gaze suddenly sharpened. She can see me. Han Sen knew this was very bad, but he had already considered this eventuality. If the being Han Sen inhabited was close to a reflective surface, Han Sen knew his presence would be exposed sooner or later. So, he didn't panic. When the woman saw the strange appearance of her eye, she didn't panic either. She smiled and said, "Interesting. You dared to use an eye trick on someone like me? You are brave." After that, the woman released a burning golden light in her eyes. It started in her pupils and spread across her irises, slowly fighting back the red and transforming it into gold. Han Sen's chest tightened. He didn't know what sort of power that woman had employed, but after the gold light consumed her eyes, the woman put away her power. As soon as she released her power, the gold color extinguished and the red reappeared. My golden eye didn't work. This is tricky, the woman said with a pleased smile. The color of her eye changed again. This time, a deep black swept over her irises. The black rolled over the entirety of her eyeballs, overwhelming the red. Once her eyes had fallen completely into darkness, the woman stopped feeding power into the technique she had used. Once again, as soon as she released the technique, the red returned to her eyes. Darkness eye didn't work either. Fascinating. The woman proceeded to try many different eye talents as she attempted to expunge Han Sen, but they only succeeded in making his vision go funny. Nothing seemed to affect the power of the blood-eye evil god beast soul, though. Han Sen was delighted with the performance of his beast soul. So this is the power of a mutant deified beast soul. Even this woman cannot do anything against me. How interesting. The woman was now smiling widely. Rather than being upset at her repeated failures, she looked thrilled. After that, the woman didn't use any more eye skills. She raised her fingertips and gathered up some sort of light. Wisps of spiritual light rose from her fingertips, turning into a mirror that hovered before her face. The mirror hung before the woman's eye, but there was no human reflection inside it. A weird light swirled around the surface of the silver mirror, and eventually, it turned a deep red color and began to coil in tighter and tighter swirls. In moments, the red color had changed to depict the face of the blood-eye evil god. Ah, it is blood-eye evil god. No wonder my eye skills didn't work. When the woman saw the image of blood-eye evil god, she smiled in sudden understanding. She raised her finger and pressed it to her forehead just above her eyes. More spiritual light went into her. The woman's eyes shattered like glass. The shadowy space that Han Sen inhabited collapsed, and he was forced to come out. He fell onto the ground and immediately tried to leap away from the house. "What's this? That isn't blood, I evil god," the woman murmured in surprise. Her eyes healed immediately, and her hands never stopped moving. She raised one hand, and a crystal ball flew toward Han Sen to trap him. Han Sen moved to evade the crystal ball, but the woman shifted the position of her hand and cast a few lights that struck Han Sen with pinpoint precision. Han Sen's body became much heavier, and his speed dropped drastically. A deep ache sank into his back, and he felt as if he had ejaculated prematurely and then become impotent. He was suddenly struck with the pain of a woman's period, and his eyesight became blurry. Pain and nausea swept through him. God only knew how many Geno arts the woman had cast to give him such a wretched series of debilitations. Han Sen used his jade skin area, which transformed his body into jade-like ice. The woman's debilitating Geno arts no longer worked on Han Sen, allowing him to dodge the second crystal attack. Then, he leaped out the window. The woman's face looked like the face of a cat in pursuit of a mouse. It was as if she had made a fascinating discovery. She ran out of the wooden house, too. Han Sen wanted to fly away and escape the island, but as soon as he moved, he saw the crystal ball racing toward him. Han Sen evaded it, but the crystal ball exploded. It transformed into a giant crystal net that covered the entire island. Han Sen had nowhere to run. Han Sen's fingers wriggled like mad, casting sword silks as he attempted to lift the net of crystal. He kept the net from falling on him, and his mind raced to find a way out of this predicament. After a few of her attacks, though, Han Sen noticed that the woman wasn't as strong as he initially believed her to be. She had the power of a king-class being at the most, he wagered, but she possessed such a variety of Geno arts that she could do almost anything. She had an infinite supply of surprises up her sleeve, that was for sure. When she saw that her crystal net couldn't trap Han Sen, the woman changed her approach. Her fingers became like blades, and she used all sorts of Geno arts to attack. Han Sen had a hard time dealing with her. Han Sen had encountered many powerful opponents in his time, and some of them had learned many skills, but this woman could use literally anything. She could fuse a dozen skills into a single attack. He had never seen anything like this before. Her attack might start out as fire powers, but when they got close to Han Sen, they might transform into gold or water powers. An attack might rage toward him, but then become as soft as a kiss when it landed. Her fingers, palms, knives, and swords didn't allow Han Sen a moment to breathe. This wasn't a fight. It was like the woman was conducting an artistic performance of many tricks. Han Sen fought to defend himself, but he couldn't win. And with the crystal net in place over the island, Han Sen knew that he couldn't escape. The woman looked shocked too, though. Han Sen's attacks were very familiar to her in some ways, but they were also quite different than she expected. Sky Palace's textless book isn't completely the same, but it is just, and the breaking power is not the same. Fascinating, the woman was captivated by Han Sen's skills. The woman knew too many Geno arts. Han Sen used skills that he thought would take advantage of the woman's weaknesses, but she always used another unexpected Geno art to escape every crisis, and Han Sen found himself fighting for his life instead. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I came here purely by happenstance. I mean you no harm, so please forgive me," Han Sen pleaded, as he continued to fight. "Use a few more Geno arts." "I have seen these before," the woman commanded, not actually responding to Han Sen's plight. Han Sen knew many Geno arts, but he didn't think that this situation called for them. Instead, he stuck with skills that he knew could counter her attacks. The woman, seeing that Han Sen was only using a few skills to break all of her Geno arts, looked profoundly annoyed. "Down!" The woman waved her hand, and the crystal net snapped Han Sen's sword silks and fell toward him. Many substance chains now writhed within the crystal net. "She's deified." Han Sen realized that the woman had been playing with him. She hadn't used her real powers up until now. Han Sen had the strong urge to use his super god spirit power to escape the falling net, but ultimately, he chose not to. Instead, he allowed himself to be captured by the crystal net. "Who are you? How are you using abilities that should belong only to the blood-eye evil god? The woman asked Han Sen, who was now trapped on the ground like a fish in a net. I am Prince 16 of the Extreme King. My name is Bai Yi. I gained the blood evil eye powers by accident. Before Han Sen could finish, the woman's face hardened. She tightened the crystal net that snared him, dragging Han Sen up into the air. How dare you lie to me? You are a crystallizer that has disguised themselves as one of the Extreme King. Blood Evil Eye is Blood Eye Evil God's Geno art. It should be impossible to wield unless you have the Blood Eye Evil God's genes. Do you think I'm stupid? The woman demanded. She gestured furiously at Han Sen. A substance chain appeared, and it lashed Han Senator the whip cut so deeply into Han Sen's flesh that bone was visible through the wound. If you already knew I was a crystallizer, why didn't you just say so? Han Sen thought, grinding his teeth. Out loud, he said, I'm a crystallizer, but I'm a mixed breed. My body has a little of the Extreme King's blood in it, and I also have some of the Blood Eye Evil God's blood. Whoosh! Before Han Sen could finish, the woman lashed him again. Her eyes looked like they were trying to bore holes into Han Sr. Mixed, my *SS. Is being a crystallizer not good enough for you? Why would you submit yourself to that slave race? And Blood Eye Evil God's blood? Tell me, how did that work out? The woman was so angry that she kept whipping Han Sen's body. Han Sen swore to himself that he would never provoke another female researcher. Her temper was really bad, but Han Sen realized something. When he saw how angry the woman had become because he pretended to be an extreme king, he hastily said, Lady, you are a crystallizer too? Yes? Do you know Left Crazy? Left Crazy and I are best friends. You know Left Crazy? The woman was both surprised and confused, and both emotions showed clearly on her face. I know him, and we are very close. I learned a Geno art from him, Han Sen said hurriedly when he confirmed that Left Crazy's name carried some weight with this woman. The woman wasn't interested in what Han Sen was saying, though. She looked at him with disdain. Left Crazy is too nice. You are a crystallizer. Even if you were his enemy, he would still be willing to teach you if you were willing to learn. Learning Geno arts from him doesn't mean that you're actually close to him. Although she said that, the woman still relented and put away her crystal net. She freed Han Sen from his bindings. What is your name, lady? Do you know Left Crazy as well? Han Sen asked the woman as he stood up and brushed the dust off of himself. The woman really was a crystallizer, which surprised Han Senator according to what Han Sen had learned thus far. The crystallizers appeared sometime after Sacred had been destroyed. The crystallizers never had a deified in their ranks, either. That woman had conducted research alongside Sacred Leader, though. That must have meant she was a powerful figure in the era of Sacred's reign. The woman ignored Han Sen's inquiry. She looked at him and said, You are of the crystallizer blood, but how are your body's genes able to evolve so fast? My genes are fast? Han Sen asked, feigning ignorance. The woman looked at Han Sen with a frown. She said to herself, This shouldn't be. My crystallizers finished their tests as a failure. Their fitness was weak, and only their intelligence was at a passable level. How could this one have evolved so fast? When Han Sen heard that, he was surprised. He looked at the woman and asked, You created the crystallizers? The woman shook her head. Not exactly. The crystallizers already existed, but I used Sacred's resources to modify the genes of the crystallizers. I sped up the progress of their evolution. It was not much of a success, but it worked out better than I had expected. Their fitness and evolution progress were bad, but they were very intelligent. They made perfect assistants for my work, and Left Crazy was one of them. After that, the woman walked back toward the wooden house. Because the woman had stopped threatening Han Sen, he no longer wanted to leave. He wanted to learn as many secrets as he could, straight from this horse's mouth. Based on the woman's story, it was clear she had once been a prestigious person in Sacred. She must have been the head of a research department or something like that. She must have known a lot. That means you created the story of genes? Han Sen asked as he reached the door. Half of it. Sacred Leader and I built the story of genes together, but it failed. The woman looked at Han Sen and went on to say, Left Crazy showed you the story of genes?
Han Sen nodded.
But he didn't tell her that he practiced the story of genes. If she found out that he had studied the story of genes, he was worried that she might decide she needed to dissect him and analyze the pieces. "Stop there," the woman said sternly as Han Sen was about to step into the house. "You stand outside. Don't track dirt into my house," the woman continued, sending a cold glance toward Han Sen. Han Sen knew that the woman meant no harm. She was just a very hygienic woman with a bad case of OCD. He didn't mind her brusqueness. He stood outside the door and said, "What did you do during your time researching the story of genes with Sacred Leader? I have heard that it is related to Super Gene." The woman went into the house and grabbed a shovel. She came out and started to fix the ground where Han Sen had disturbed the grass while fighting. "You, start floating. Don't touch anything here," the woman said. She then sprayed Han Sen with a perfume. Han Sen made himself float as the woman commanded. He wanted to learn about the relationship between the story of genes and Super Gene, and also their relation to the sanctuaries. The woman kept cleaning where Han Sen had walked, and she said, "We researched the story of genes so that creatures could learn to use Super Gene. Did Left Crazy not teach you that?" "No. He only told me that the requirements of the story of genes hadn't been fulfilled, and thus, there were limits to what he could investigate." Han Sen kept trying to get her to tell him more. The woman really didn't mind the beans spilling, so she went on to say, "I cannot believe Left Crazy is still researching the story of genes. He was right, though. There are requirements for the story of genes that were never fulfilled. Even now, it is a failed research project. What is Super Gene? What is Super Gene used for?" Han Sen asked, trying not to let his voice betray how badly he wanted this answer. The woman looked at Han Sen with an odd expression. As she stared, she asked, "Do you believe God exists? Why am I being asked this crappy question again?" Han Sen wondered, annoyed. This was a question he couldn't care less about answering. Han Sen sighed and said, "I've met a couple of guys who called themselves gods, but I don't know if they were real gods. Those gods you met, did they claim to be able to fulfill your wishes?" The woman squinted at Han Sen. Han Sen's heart jumped. He had gotten to the crux of the issue already, and so he quickly answered, "Yes." The woman quirked her lips into a smile. Running her hand through her hair, she said, "Becoming Super Gene means killing these guys who call themselves God. Why are you trying to do that?" Han Sen was shocked. He knew how scary those beings were. But luckily, they couldn't directly attack the beings of the universe. Their powers were much stronger than any creature within the Geno universe. Not even deified beings could be compared to them. The woman and Sacred Leader had wanted to kill these self-proclaimed gods, and Han Sen shared their insane desire. He just wasn't strong enough right now, so he didn't know how he would eventually bring the gods down. Because of this, Han Sen had no plans to kill a god just yet. When he had been inside Destiny's Tower of the Extreme King, he had only seen the statue of a god. If the black crystal armor hadn't helped him, he would have been incapable of defeating the thing. He couldn't imagine how scary things might have been if he faced a real god. "I don't know why Sacred Leader was pursuing this goal, but I know I had my reasons." The woman obviously not wanting to share her actual reason. "Having a Super Gene can allow a person to kill those gods?" Han Sen asked. "According to my research, yes. That is correct." The woman nodded, speaking with certainty. But then the woman shook her head, smiling wryly. "But our research still failed. We discovered a method that could turn a body into a Super Gene, but there was no creature in this universe that could use this method. It was like we were holding a candle, and we knew we could light it, but we didn't have a single match to do so. We were so close to dispelling the darkness, but we couldn't. That was the difficulty we faced. The thing that we lacked to complete the story of genes seemed like an insurmountable barrier. It made all of our efforts seem fairly pointless. Is the story of genes that difficult to practice? There really wasn't anyone across the entire universe who could use it?" Han Sen asked in confusion. After all, he had already learned the story of genes. The woman thought for a moment, then said, "This problem is very complicated, and explaining it fully would take some time. Let me use an analogy instead. A horse needs to eat plants for energy so it can stay alive and run. However, a car requires fuel in order to operate. You cannot give the horse fuel, and you cannot give the car grass. This description isn't perfect, but it sort of gets across what I mean. The story of genes has many requirements, and there is no creature in the universe that can satisfy every one of them. You cannot lack in any department. Han Sen pretended to understand, but he actually rather confused. He started to ask another question, but he just didn't know how to explain what he didn't understand. Who are those people that call themselves gods? Why can only those with a super gene kill them? Han Sen returned the conversation to the initial question. That question is also complicated. To put it simply, these gods are creatures, but they exist in a different way than we do. It's like the difference between corporeal life forms and spirits. But the reality is more complicated, especially when one tries to understand how they interact with our universe. The woman paused, and then she went on to say, "And you asked why those with a super gene can kill those who claim to be gods? It all began with a test conducted by the sacred leader." "What test?" Han Sen asked. The woman didn't answer Han Senator. She stood up and said, "Okay, the garden's clean now. Don't you dare make this place dirty again. If you do, I'll turn you into a pig." Han Sen still hung in the air, not daring to touch the ground. He was worried she really would do what she claimed. Considering the woman's power, she probably had a stronger gene-altering skill than Burning Lamp Alpha did. "You still haven't told me what sort of test the sacred leader conducted," Han Sen said to the woman as he hovered in the air. The woman turned around and looked at Han Sr. "Why do I have to tell you?" Han Sen didn't know how to respond. She had no connection to him, and she didn't owe him anything. There really was no reason for her to tell him. Pang! While Han Sen's mind raced for an answer, the woman returned to the house and slammed the door. Should I tell this woman I have practiced the story of genes? If I tell her, I might learn more secrets from her. But she also might catch me and use me as some sort of lab rat. That would be bad. Han Sen found it to be quite the dilemma, and he was torn on what to do. The woman had said Han Sen wasn't allowed to touch her stuff. Han Sen didn't want to upset her cleanliness and OCD, so he flew over the fence and landed on the ground outside. He sat there, looking up at the yellow clouds. He pulled out the Wanja Rubik's Cube and sent a video to the Treasure Identifier Elder. When the Treasure Identifier Elder had played Han Sen last video, it had drawn the focus of all the other races. That light yellow clouds became the focus of many elites. When this new video came out, many factions were able to confirm Han Sen's location based on the changes in the cloud patterns. But because the demon spirit was probably close by, no one dared to go. The Extreme King wasn't very concerned about it, though. Bao Qin had retreated after he was injured, but the Extreme King had hurriedly sent out more deified elites to prowl through the Tianxia system. Han Sen sat on the island for hours, trying to decide whether or not he should tell the woman that he had practiced the story of genes. Suddenly, the sea of clouds rumbled. Many giant cloud dragons came roaring out of the veil, pulling the sea demon car to the island. The demon spirit is here. Han Sen was shocked, and he hastily decided to run. The woman hadn't killed him, but that didn't mean that the demon spirit would spare him. "You come in," said the woman. He looked up to see her head poking out a window. Han Sen answered by running into the garden. "Feet." The woman frowned. Han Sen quickly jumped into the air. He flew through the garden, then floated into the house, being careful not to touch anything. He hung in the center of the building, as far away from all of the house's contents as he could get. "Don't say anything and don't make a noise," the woman advised him with a frown. Han Sen nodded but made no further answer. "Good boy." The woman smiled, pleased with Han Sen's performance. Just like the previous 2 times that Han Sen had seen, the demon spirit stood outside the fence and stared up at the window. The woman ignored him for half the day, becoming grumpier with every second that passed. In the end, she couldn't help but open the window and shout at him. When the woman grew tired of yelling and subsided into silence, the demon spirit left. It was as if he had come there just so the woman could shout at him. Whatever was going on between the two of them, they obviously had a lot of history. Han Sen was curious about the relationship between the woman and the demon spirit, but he knew it would be best not to ask the woman just yet. He could see the anger and scorn still etched deeply into her face. "Do you want to know who that is?" the woman asked. She turned around, her intense eyes landing on Han Sen like physical weights. "No, Han Sen shook his head without thinking. He felt fear when she asked him, and he knew nothing good would come from that particular answer. The woman was shocked, but she laughed. She narrowed her eyes slightly as she examined Han Sr. Do you want to know what sort of test Sacred Leader conducted? Han Sen looked at the woman, his expression carefully veiled. He wanted to know, but the woman obviously wanted something in return. He would need to know what she wanted before he agreed to some sort of bargain. The woman smiled at him. I will tell you, but you will have to help me with something first. Do it, and I will explain everything. You are so strong. If there's something that you can't do yourself, how will I be able to accomplish it? Han Sen asked hesitantly. The woman smiled and said, Don't worry, the task isn't dangerous. I simply can't leave this island, so I need your help to get it done. Han Sen remained silent, but he didn't think this would be a trivial task. The woman paused, then pointed in a particular direction. Once you leave this island, keep going that way. Before long, you will see some light. You must follow that light. Then, you will find an island that is identical to this one. That island doesn't have a wooden house on it, though. You must go and cut off the top of that mountain, just like this. That is all you have to do. Is there a creature over there or something? Han Sen asked. The woman shook her head. No, but you must remember one thing. Once you see the light, you cannot speak. As long as you don't talk, you should be fine. If you say anything, even if it is just a single word, you will be dead. What is the light? Han Sen asked. I don't know what it is, but it is still up to you if you want to go or not. I won't force you to go if you don't want to, the woman said. Then, she turned away from Han Sen and carried on with her research. Can I see those Geno arts? Han Sen pointed to the books lined up on the shelves. They were the best Geno arts of all the races. Even if Han Sen didn't practice them, it would be useful for him to be able to remember them all. If you're willing to go, you can read as much as you like. Okay, you can leave my house now, the woman said, without raising her head. Han Sen flew out the window, and he landed outside the yard. The woman was way too clean, and she had a serious case of OCD. If Han Sen wasn't working for her, she would never agree to let him touch her things. Han Sen decided to go to the place the woman had described to him. The woman had nothing to gain by hiding any dangers in the task. If Han Sen died halfway through the task, then sending him would have been pointless. Even if it is dangerous, I can only suppose the danger will arise after completing the mission. Han Sen knew that the woman probably wanted him to free her from her prison. Han Sen turned and looked back through the window. I'm willing to go, but first, can you tell me what kind of test the Sacred Leader conducted? Han Sen asked. I will tell you when you get back, the woman's voice responded from someplace inside the wooden house. I'm afraid that when I get back, you will not be here, Han Sen said. The woman went silent for a while, and Han Sen wasn't sure what that meant. When he was just about to say something more, something flew out the window. Han Sen caught the item, and he noticed it was a stone book. He tried to open it, but it seemed to have been sealed by some sort of power. Everything you need to know is within that book. When you have finished what I've asked you to do, the locks on that book will be removed. Now, it is again up to you to decide if you want to go or not, the woman said. Han Sen looked at the stone book. He wasn't sure if what the woman was saying was true, but he was out of options. He had no choice but to believe her. Otherwise, he'd never know the truth. D***MN. Still holding the stone book, Han Sen gnashed his teeth and asked, in the legends, Sacred had a xenogenic space called the Sanctuaries. Do you know that place? That is the place Sacred Leader researched the immortal spirits. I've never been there myself, though. So, I don't know, the woman said. The fact that the woman didn't know about the sanctuaries was quite disappointing to Han Sen. Han Sen wanted to know the answers to a few more questions, but the woman said, I will not answer any more questions of yours if you aren't going. You have to tell me what the light looks like, Han Sen said. You will know it when you see it, the woman said coldly. Han Sen shrugged and then flew in the direction that the woman had told him to go. As he was surrounded by the yellow clouds, there was a limit to how much Han Sen could see. So, he made use of his Dongxian area to try to detect nearby objects and energies. There was nothing notable about the direction in which he was flying. As far as he could tell, there were just more clouds. One thing that might have been different from other places within the Tianxia system, however, was the distinct lack of xenogeneics. Han Sen continued flying in the direction the woman had instructed him to go, and he didn't deviate. And lo and behold, after 3 or 4 hours, he saw a light ahead. The light was like the sun in the twilight hours. It was a deep red, and it looked like a big lantern on the horizon. Just as the woman said, he knew it when he saw it. When Han Sen found the light, it was as if the light had found him, too. It flew over towards Han Sen, enveloping him in its glow. Han Sen remembered what the woman said, and he didn't make a peep. The light spun around him for a while, but eventually lost interest. A few minutes later, it flew away. Han Sen felt some modicum of relief. He caught up to the light, though, and he followed it from behind. The light was pretty slow, but it also drifted back and forth. It didn't stick to a fixed trajectory or direction. It went left, right, forward, and back. Han Sen was confused, but he still followed it. Luckily, the wandering light didn't seem to be leading him into danger. As he flew, he still didn't notice any nearby xenogeneics. After following the light for half a day, he suddenly saw a giant shadow ahead. When he peered at it a little more intently, he noticed that the shadow was actually another island. That made him happy. When Han Sen got a bit closer, he noticed that the island was indeed the same as the woman's island. Even all the plant life was identical. The light went to the island and settled down upon the grass like it was sleeping. Han Sen came down to the island, as well. As he came close, the heavy gravity dragged him down to the surface. He certainly couldn't fly on this version of the island. That mattered little to Han Sen, though. He walked towards the mountain at the island's center, and it wasn't long before he came before its foothills. There were some stone stairs carved into the familiar rocks, and so Han Sen walked all the way up them. There was no wooden house or garden on the small peak. A weird black symbol was carved into the side of the peak. He couldn't tell what it was. Han Sen guessed that might have been the restriction of the island. If he destroyed it, then the woman might be freed. Han Sen had no reason to hesitate. The Geno universe was messy enough, and the woman was just one of the many beings that lived there. It didn't matter if she was good or bad. Han Sen pulled out his ghost teeth knife and used it to swipe the mountaintop. He wanted to cut through it, but when the teeth power hit the mountain, that symbol glowed with a deep light. The teeth power vanished. The blade of the ghost teeth knife still struck the mountain, however, carving a mark across the stone. Han Sen slashed a few more times, and aside from the physical strikes of the weapon, no other powers could damage the stone. The symbol carved into the mountain seemed to just consume any powers that came against it. If I have to keep slashing and slashing like this, how long is this going to take? Han Sen thought gloomily. He tried to cut through the symbol on the mountain, first to see if he could remove it. But when he tried to strike the symbol, it seemed to sink down into the stone, rather than remaining on the surface. He couldn't tell how deep it might have sunk beneath the surface. Han Sen didn't know what to do, so he just kept striking the peak of the mountain. Luckily, no dangerous creatures had appeared to harass him. Despite all the loud noises ringing from the stone mountain, no hidden xenogeneics were waking up from their slumber to come and see the commotion. The light was still resting on the grass, too. It didn't seem to care what Han Sen did. Han Sen kept digging, and before long, he became really sweaty. He felt like a senile old man as he hacked away at the side of the mountain. Luckily, the peak was pretty small. Han Sen guessed it might take another 2 days for him to cut all the way through it. After digging for 10 hours straight, Han Sen's hard work had opened the peak a little. Nothing happened, though, which reinforced Han Sen's feeling of security. Dong! Han Sen struck again. But when he raised his knife, he saw that blood was leaking from the stone where his knife had just landed. What? Why is the mountain bleeding? Han Sen's heart jumped. He took a step back and fell into a defensive position himself. Han Sen didn't like the fact that the mountain was bleeding, especially after his time in Do God City. That place had made him afraid of bleeding rocks. Han Sen wasn't afraid of having a real fight, but he was unsettled by tricky monsters that messed with people's heads. Ning Yu's little green sword had come from a bleeding rock. Han Sen still wouldn't dare go close to that terrible thing. As he watched the blood trickle from the rock, Han Sen's scalp felt numb. He wasn't frightened, exactly, but he felt very uncomfortable. Han Sen waited a while. and he noted that only a small volume of blood had trickled out, and no other weird things seemed to be happening. He waved his hand and brushed the blood away from the wall to look at the knife mark. What he saw next chilled him. In the deepest part of the knife mark, Han Sen could see flesh. He didn't know what creature this might have been, but he had cut a wound into it that was a few centimeters long. The blood had been coming out of that wound. Han Sen looked at the wound that had now stopped bleeding, his lips pressed into a tight, bloodless line. He didn't know what the creature inside the mountain was. If it had been dead, it shouldn't have been bleeding. If it was alive, how could that be? It had been buried under an entire mountain. Just the mere thought of that was scary. The wound he had cut into the creature was the only place that Han Sen could see its flesh. He hesitated a bit, but he eventually decided to resume digging. He had already come this far, so he couldn't just give up now. That wasn't his style. Even if the creature was still alive, that didn't matter to him. If it couldn't get out of a mountain, it couldn't have been too horrifyingly strong. Han Sen used his knife to keep digging around the flesh. If he could dig away the rocks that covered it, he might be able to get a better view of the creature. Han Sen dug for a while more, and slowly, the excavation site expanded. Eventually, he uncovered a scrap of yellow cloth. The body part Han Sen had wounded was actually a leg. Han Sen could tell that the leg belonged to a woman. The pants certainly appeared girly. Han Sen frowned, and he kept on digging. More and more parts of the being were starting to be revealed, and soon, Han Sen was able to confirm that it was indeed a woman. He carved carefully into the rock, revealing the woman's white feet. She was wearing yellow pants, and she had very long legs. Her upper body was still inside the mountain, so he couldn't yet tell what she looked like. But he couldn't detect a life force from her body. She was like a corpse. But when Han Sen checked out the wound on her leg again, the cut appeared to have closed. And earlier, she had been bleeding. At this point, Han Sen had no idea if the woman was alive or dead. Han Sen had a sudden and disturbing thought. He used all his strength to dig away the rest of the mountain. More and more parts of the woman became visible. When Han Sen dug her head out and got a look at her face, his eyes opened wide. This woman looked exactly the same as the woman in the wooden house. Even a twin wouldn't look this similar. What's going on? Why is this woman buried here? If this woman is alive, then who is that woman in the wooden house? Han Sen shivered as he thought of all this. But when Han Sen removed the last of the rock that had held the woman in place, she showed no sign of moving. It really did look like she was dead. She wasn't breathing, and she had no heartbeat. But when he glanced at her face, she looked more at peace than anything. She looked as if she was softly asleep. Han Sen examined the woman, but she didn't look sick. She just didn't seem to have a life force. Han Sen placed his power into her, but that quickly proved pointless. He couldn't kickstart her life force. The locks on the stone book were still present, as well. So, Han Sen set the woman aside and resumed digging. Han Sen dug steadily through the stone, and it was only a matter of time before he broke through. His hands were getting pretty sore, and he could hardly hold his knife anymore. Xie Qingqing is far better suited for this sort of work. With his power, and him yelling "Alu, alu, alu," it would get done much faster. Han Sen thought as he continued digging. Han Sen. Suddenly, Han Sen heard someone call his name. He was about to answer, but when he opened his mouth, his face paled slightly. He quickly closed it. The woman told him that if he spoke a word, he would die. There was no one here, anyway, so who could have possibly called him? Is it the body of the woman? Still keeping his jaw firmly shut, Han Sen turned around to observe that woman's body. When he was halfway through his turn, he froze. The woman's body had vanished. Han Sen. The voice called out Han Sen's name again. This time, it was right next to his ear, too. He even felt a soft wind tickle his cheek. Han Sen didn't speak. He quickly turned around and activated his area. Han Sen caught his breath. The woman was standing not too far behind Han Sen, and she was smiling. Her life force was very strong now, and as far as he could tell, it was identical to that of the woman in the wooden house. He could barely believe that this was the body that had been lying on the ground only moments before. What? We parted ways such a short time ago, and you've already forgotten me? The woman smiled. Han Sen opened his mouth to ask if the woman before him was a human or a ghost, but then he remembered that the other woman had told him that under no circumstances should he speak. He still didn't understand what was up with this other woman, but he didn't talk. He simply looked at her. The woman laughed and said, "You are being careful. I told you that you couldn't talk when you were in the presence of the light, but now that I'm free, you can go ahead and speak." Han Sen still didn't say a word. He just stared at the woman, stunned by how similar the two were. Aside from wearing different clothes, they looked precisely the same. Han Sen really wanted to ask her what was going on, but he didn't dare speak. He thought about it some more, and he decided to write down some words with his ghost teeth knife. "Why are you here?" "You are being very careful." The woman chuckled darkly. "This is my real body. It was trapped here. What you met earlier was just a doll with my spirit inside it. How else do you think I have managed to live so long? Not many beings from the era of sacred are still alive. Anyone that has survived this long is most likely making use of forbidden skills." Han Sen carved more words into the ground. "You suppressed your body here?" The woman lifted her lips. "I didn't want to hurt myself, so why would I bind myself here? Someone else did this to me, and so my real body was trapped here. But because of that suppression, my body didn't age. It still looks the same as it did back then. Why didn't you find anyone else to dig up your body before me?" Han Sen asked by carving more words. "Are you done yet? If you don't want to go, that's fine. But I'm leaving," the woman said. She proceeded to walk down the mountain, ignoring Han Sen. Han Sen had almost broken through the entire mountaintop, but the woman was descending quickly from the mountain. She obviously intended to leave the island. He didn't know if he should finish digging or chase after her. Han Sen gritted his teeth and ignored the woman who was leaving the island. He continued digging into the mountain. That woman walked toward the light, and when she reached out to it, the light flew into her hands. Grabbing that light, the woman moved away from the island. Han Sen was shocked. The light had brought him here, and if the woman left with the light, Han Sen didn't know if he would still be able to leave. Han Sen wasn't a saint, and he wasn't close to the woman in the wooden house. He wouldn't give his life up for her. Gritting his teeth, Han Sen went after the departing woman. Han Sen shook his head but didn't speak. He looked at the woman's hand, and he saw that she was still holding the light she had stolen. Han Sen moved a bit closer, and he noticed that the light was actually a red lantern. The woman held the red lantern before her as she traveled through the clouds. She was wearing yellow clothing, but her feet were bare. With the red light shining across her as she flew, she looked very weird. Han Sen followed her from behind, but still, he didn't speak. The woman clutched the lantern, continuing to move forward. She was moving much more smoothly than Han Sen. But just as Han Sen was wondering if the woman knew where they were going, something bright appeared in front of him. They moved out of the clouds and approached an island. Since he couldn't see the peak, Han Sen didn't know which island he was seeing. So, he didn't speak. The woman made her way up the mountain, and Han Sen followed her silently. When they were halfway up, Han Sen could feel that the mountain would have no peak. He felt as if there would be a wooden house and a garden. "Are we really back here?" Han Sen thought to himself. He walked all the way to the mountaintop and confirmed his suspicion. The woman walked into the garden, heading for the wooden house. Han Sen followed the woman into the house. Han Sen thought something was amiss. The woman in the wooden house loved to clean, and she had a severe case of OCD. He wasn't allowed to walk in her garden, let alone her house. But Han Sen had followed this woman all the way into the wooden house. She hadn't said a word, and that made Han Sen suspicious. Is she really not that woman? Is this a fake version of the island, then? Han Sen frowned as he looked around the wooden house. From the first floor to the second floor, there was no one else except for the woman holding the lantern. Han Sen picked up a pen and wrote on a piece of paper, "Where is your clone doll?" He watched her intently to see what her reaction might suggest. Han Sen didn't really need an answer to this question, but he wanted to see her reaction to him messing with her things. The woman looked at the paper and said, "My real self is free. So, my clone is now gone." That sounds untrue, Han Sen thought. The woman hadn't been bothered by Han Sen's use of her pen and paper. That made him really suspicious. Han Sen looked at the stone book and found that it was still locked tightly shut. He hesitated to do so, but he held the book out in front of her. He wrote on the paper, "Can you take a look at this book and help me break these bindings?" "Why would I want to help you?" the woman asked with a raised eyebrow. She didn't accept the book. Han Sen now knew that this version of the woman was fake. The woman had personally given him the stone book. If this woman wearing yellow clothes was real, she would have recognized this book, and she wouldn't have said something like that. What to do? Han Sen frowned. He knew that this woman was fake, but the wooden house was the same. Han Sen wasn't sure how to proceed. Han Sen didn't really care who this woman was. Real or fake, it didn't matter to him. But he didn't want to just leave things like this. There were secrets right in front of his nose, and yet he couldn't uncover them. As Han Sen tried to figure out what to do, he suddenly heard the roar of a big dragon. A giant purple dragon soared through the sky above the island. Atop the giant dragon was a man from the Extreme King. This is really the place. The dragon was too big to land on the island, so it circled overhead. The Extreme King man stood atop the head of the dragon, peering down at the island. Han Sen was shocked, and he thought to himself, "The Extreme King have gotten here so quickly?" Han Sen didn't recognize this Extreme King man, but he immediately identified the giant dragon beneath the man's feet. Han Sen had never seen it before, but he knew its name. It was the famous Extreme Purple Demon Dragon. It was deified, and it was a mount for the king's brother Meng Lai. Meng Lai was King Bai's biological brother, and he had become deified a long time ago. He was one of the top 10 elites of the Extreme King. If even the likes of Meng Lai had come to the Tianxia system to hunt down Han Sen, that showed just how much they wanted him dead. But Han Sen couldn't blame the Extreme King. The king's son had been murdered. If Han Sen didn't pay for what he had done, then the dignity and pride of the Extreme King and King Bai would be forever tarnished. "Han Sen, I know you are here. Do you want to come out by your own volition, or do you want me to come down there and drag you out?" Meng Lai boomed from the air, staring down at the wooden house. Han Sen's heart began to pound. He knew the Extreme King would come after he sent the video, but he hadn't thought they would arrive so quickly. Han Sen had expected the demon spirit to be nearby when the Extreme King arrived, so they would have to deal with him before they could focus on Han's senator, but in a surprising turn of events, the demon spirit had yet to appear. "Two deifieds have come looking for you. It seems as if you're in over your head." The woman looked at Han Sen with interest. Before Han Sen could answer, the extreme purple demon dragon beneath Meng Lai gathered up a sphere of dragon power. It turned itself into a being of purple fire. It was going to smite the island and turn it to ash. The woman's face hardened, and the light of the red lantern she was holding grew brighter. The red light covered the whole island, intercepting the purple fireball. The dragon's attack was unable to penetrate the light. The purple fire burned fiercely and the red light wavered, but it still managed to shield the island from the power of the fire. The purple fire was incredibly wild, but it couldn't make it past the shield. The extreme purple demon dragon became incredibly angry. It spat out more of that purple fire, but try as it might, it couldn't displace the red light. The woman was unshaken. She raised her lantern and put her hand inside it. When she pulled her hand back out of it, Han Sen saw there was a little flame flickering atop her fingers. The woman flicked it at the extreme purple demon dragon that hovered in the sky. That small flame shot upward, rising until it hit the dragon. Boom! Han Sen watched what looked like a nuclear bomb going off. The giant body of the extreme purple demon dragon was engulfed by a bright red sea of fire. The monster was transformed into a big, burning fireball. It squealed in pain, and its wings flapped madly as it tried to put out the fire that was ravaging it. But the more it flapped, the more the fire burned. Han Sen was frozen. As a fire-aligned deified xenogenic, the extreme purple demon dragon should have been able to eat fire for breakfast. Instead, it was burning in intense pain. It was difficult to imagine how terrifying that tiny flame must have been. The woman stood as calmly as if nothing spectacular had happened. She continued to hold the big red lantern, and she stood in front of the window, looking up at the extreme purple demon dragon and Meng Lai. Suddenly, Han Sen saw Meng Lai roll up his sleeves. Then it was like the man turned into a black hole. The red fire on the extreme purple demon dragon was sucked into that black hole, and it all disappeared. There wasn't even a whiff of smoke remaining. Meng Lai is very powerful, Han Sen thought to himself. Who are you? Why are you protecting a fugitive like Han Sen? Meng Lai stood atop the head of the extreme purple demon dragon's head, looking down at the woman near the window. He frowned. This is my house, the woman said simply. You cannot just come here and attempt to burn it down, killing as you please. Meng Lai looked at the woman in the same way. Han Sen has a deep grudge with the Extreme King. The Extreme King will make him pay with his blood. If you would grant me access to your abode, we will greatly appreciate it. And what if I don't? The woman wasn't pleased by Meng Lai's tone. Meng Lai had asked her to stay out of the way, but it had sounded more like a command. There was no room for maneuvering or negotiation. Then I will forge my own path. The Extreme King are here now, and no one can stop me, Meng Lai said imperiously. Hearing Meng Lai say that, Han Sen almost burst out laughing. The Extreme King had enough power to suppress many races, and all of the top 10 deifieds of the Extreme King were a serious threat. But Meng Lai had just condescended to the wrong person. This woman had come from the era of the Sacred Leader. The Extreme King's alpha had been merely a servant to a woman like this, once upon a time. And now, an heir of the Extreme King was talking down to her in such a manner. Han Sen knew what she was going to do, just judging from the man's disrespectful tone of voice. The Extreme King must be really powerful. I am keen to see how you, a scion of the Extreme King, will build a path that cuts right through me, the woman said, her voice dripping with contempt. Meng Lai frowned. The Extreme King were one of the most famous races in the universe, and they had been for a very long time. Furthermore, Meng Lai was the brother of the king. Aside from those of the very high or the ancient god, no one ever dared to speak to them in such a way. Humph! Meng Lai flipped his hands out and started to push toward the island. The hand became a big print that suddenly covered the whole shield. A hellish godlight burned from the print. It turned into an old word that read king, and it was infused with powers for crushing the sky and the ground. The clouds of the Tianxia system shook because of that word. The clouds nearby were all rolling, and space was tearing and coming undone under the force of the large print. The whole area had become a dangerous maelstrom of destructive power. In Han Sen's eyes, it was like the whole world was being flattened by that unstoppable word. The island was going to get crushed like an egg. You stole the world print, and now you have the gall to show it off here? The woman looked up with disdain. She raised her hands, and a small print appeared on her fingers. She threw it at the big print that was coming down toward the island. The small print and the big print collided. Weird symbols flashed across the smaller print. Han Sen couldn't tell what the symbols meant, but the sight of them was disconcerting. It was like the universe's destiny now resided in that little print. Boom! The small print hit the big print. Then, the scary big print shattered. It couldn't repel the small print. How is that possible? Meng Lai's face changed. His king print could suppress the sky and earth, and no race should have been able to stop it. But now, a much smaller print had been able to crush it. It was a sight that beggared belief. Han Sen had used his purple-eye butterfly to observe the conflict. The woman's small print had a similar structure to the big print, but the smaller variant's power was much denser. They looked roughly the same, but when they ran into each other, it was like refined steel going up against baked clay. The world's shocking king print shattered. It couldn't compare to the woman's world print. The small print broke the world's shocking king print, and after that, it continued on its course towards Meng Lai. The print didn't become any bigger, but it did seem like the world was becoming smaller instead, shrinking under the twisted power of the print. The influence of the print seemed to spread over everything around them. Meng Lai's jaw tightened. Several gold substance chains flew from his body, assembling themselves into a big hand that was poised to strike back against the little print. But the big hand broke when it came into contact with that print. All the substance chains snapped, too. It was impossible to repel the power of that small print. Seeing that the little print was about to suppress him, Meng Lai shouted. Golden light burst from him. His body turned gold as his muscles expanded, and his armor buckled and broke as his body grew too large for it to contain. In the next second, Meng Lai's hand gripped the extreme purple demon dragon's head. The gold of his body affected the extreme purple demon dragon, and the dragon began turning gold as well. Meng Lai roared. He was holding the extreme purple demon dragon up. He lifted it, like a dancing ant holding up an elephant. Meng Lai heaved the dragon toward the small world print that was headed his way, and when the dragon left his hands, it became a draconic lance. It struck the small world print, and it managed to knock the small world print away. Han Sen was shocked by this, and he wondered, what kind of power is this? A deified xenogeneic turned into a lance? The woman looked at Meng Lai in surprise. The weapon part of Geno world speech used in conjunction with bloodline spirit body metal element. They can be combined? It looks like these slaves have something decent in them, after all. What are you talking about? This is my Extreme King's Golden Soldier King body. Geno world speech? You are full of crap, Meng Lai snarled. Then he swung the gold dragon lance at the woman. The gold dragon lance was burning with purple dragon fire. The dragon lance's metal slid forward, ripping the fabric of space as it appeared in front of the woman. The woman looked at the gold dragon lance with interest. She summoned a small world print in front of her to block the gold dragon lance. The print was small, but as far as the lance was concerned, the print might as well have been as big as a planet. No matter how scary the lance's dragon fire was, it was drawn magnetically to the print. The attack couldn't go past the woman's shield. Meng Lai kept his grip on the heart of the gold dragon. He continued to roar and sprint forward with the gold dragon lance, thrusting it into the little world print. The lance's dragon firepower kept being driven into the small print spell. Get lost. When Meng Lai roared, the gold dragon lance finally pierced through the small print. It exploded, and then space cracked. The gold dragon lance roared with Meng Lai, and it shot forward toward the woman's eyebrow. The woman looked shocked, and she didn't move. The raging dragon fire of the gold lance punched a hole straight through her skull, but her body simply exploded. And then, the body of another woman appeared behind Meng Lai. Moon doppelganger and teleportation? Han Sen was frozen by the sight. This was the first time he had seen another person fight like this. The woman's moon doppelganger was a little different from Han Sen's, but it was based on the same concept. However, the woman's moon doppelganger was clearer, and her teleportation didn't cause a ripple in space. It wasn't like when Han Sen used his dragon wings and gathered up power. The woman's enemies would have no warning that she was about to teleport. Not until she appeared behind them, at least. What a scary woman. If I could teleport like that, I would have a much higher chance of success when fighting strong enemies. It had been a long time since Han Sen had made use of break space flash with his dragon wings. It was still teleportation, but its range was too short, and it took too long to cast. It wasn't suitable for king-class fights. After all, the dragon wings were a mutant Marquis xenogeneic gene. It couldn't keep up with the needs of a king-class battle. Meng Lai reacted quickly. He flipped the gold dragon lance, and the lance fire was like a roaring gold dragon as it headed for the woman behind him. Pang! The woman's body broke again, but she appeared next to Meng Lai, muttering to herself, I underestimated this race of slaves. This gold soldier king body is quite interesting. Meng Lai's eyes were on fire. He couldn't bear listening to her. He looked like some deranged demon god as he swung the gold dragon lance. Anything the lance touched was incinerated by the fire it carried. The sea of clouds was vaporized, and substance chains of gold dragon fire roared across the sky. These deified elites are too strong. Meng Lai is forcing another deified creature to be his weapon. He's wielding it like any other weapon. And the woman is practically fighting two deified elites. Han Sen felt lust rise inside him as he watched the display of power. If he could gain that power in a group of deified creatures at his disposal, no one could defeat him. Against the rampaging gold dragon lance, the woman could only use clones and her ability of teleportation to fight. But Han Sen could still tell that the woman had some extra tricks up her sleeve. She wasn't trying to escape. More than anything, it looked as if she was admiring his gold soldier king body. Meng Lai noticed this, too. In his fury, he sped up his attacks even more. The substance chains were like dragon fire chewing up the sky and the daytime. He wanted to grind the woman into dust, but his efforts were futile. The woman's teleportation capabilities were so good. It was like she had a frameshift drive installed. She shifted position so fast that it seemed like she was everywhere at once. It didn't matter how strong Ming Lai was, because he couldn't touch a single hair upon her head. Ming Lai was unable to touch the woman. His eyes opened wide, and he began thrusting the gold dragon lance toward the island. The lance fire became a roaring gold dragon that came for the island. It looked like one bite was all it would take to devour the entire island. The lantern was still on the island, and it was glowing red. It protected the island, but the red light couldn't withstand the lance's power forever. The lance's fire broke the red light, and the dragon fire covered the sky and the earth. Han Sen suddenly felt very anxious. This was the power of two deified beings doing battle. Perhaps the island could withstand it, but Han Sen and the wooden house wouldn't be able to. The wooden house held many Geno arts, too, and they were at risk of being destroyed. Han Sen wasn't overly concerned about them, though. Having a bunch of great Geno arts would be useless if he died. He turned around and started to leave the house, but the dragon fire suddenly disappeared. He raised his head. The gold dragon lance had stopped moving. It was hanging over the island, and the woman's bare, pale feet rested lightly atop the weapon. Nice timing. Ming Lai had been unable to hit the woman, and so he had decided to strike the island instead. Now that the woman was where he wished her to be, the gold substance chains danced. The gold dragon lance was imbued with gold fire. It roared like a giant dragon, and it prepared to lash out at her. Gold Soldier King body, huh? Now I understand. The woman still stood upon the lance. She smiled faintly. As the lance's gold dragon fire exploded, a white light surrounded her feet. The light was contagious, and it infected the gold dragon lance. The gold dragon lance changed color, transforming into a white metal dragon lance. Pang! The woman's bare feet stood firmly upon the lance, and then, the white dragon lance exploded with a dragon light. It blasted Ming Lai, and he let go of the weapon. The white dragon lance flew away from him, then spun and landed in the woman's hands. Impossible! How do you have the Gold Soldier King body? Ming Lai stared at the woman who was holding the dragon lance. It was like he had seen a ghost. The woman held the white dragon lance loosely in one hand. She swung it almost casually, sending it to strike Ming Lai. The dragon fire of the lance was just like the fire Ming Lai himself had been employing. Ming Lai's face paled. He didn't dare fight the wrathful power of that dragon lance. He stumbled back and cast some gold substance chains, creating a gold shield in front of himself. But the power of that dragon lance was too scary. It pierced right through the shield, and it was headed for Ming Lai. Han Sen wasn't surprised that the woman could use these abilities, though. He had heard about this before when he saw the woman read the shocking world record of the Extreme King. The Extreme King had stolen her Geno world speech and combined portions of it with the Blood Pulse spirit body. Even the Extreme King's basic shocking world record had been stolen from the woman. It was not weird that she was able to employ the Gold Soldier King body, but the proficiency with which the woman wielded the extreme purple demon dragon was intimidating. Ming Lai was considered quite strong among the deified elites, but upon meeting a monster like this woman, he lost his cool. After losing his lance, he stopped fighting. When he found a chance to flee, he took it. He didn't dare to continue fighting the woman. He wasn't going to get the extreme purple demon dragon back, either. Why did you let him run? Han Sen asked quickly when he saw that the woman hadn't stopped Ming Lai from escaping. As soon as the words left his mouth, he clamped his jaw shut. He had been watching the fight so intently, he had forgotten about the fact that he wasn't supposed to be talking. But nothing bad happened after Han Sen spoke. The woman landed in the garden, and she said smoothly, "My body has just been freed, and I'm still very weak. If he kept fighting, I doubt I would have been able to kill him." "So, this is you in a weak state?" Han Sen was frozen. "Weird." I spoke out loud, and yet nothing has happened. Is this the real woman? Why didn't she recognize the stone book? And what happened to her OCD? Han Sen looked at the woman. Try as he might, he couldn't determine if she was real or fake. There was something else Han Sen was wondering about, too. The fight had been conducted on a mind-blowing scale, and Han Sen was still feeling the aftershocks. But despite that, the demon spirit hadn't appeared. Why didn't it show up? The woman returned to the wooden house and placed a crystal shield over it. Han Sen had seen the woman use this skill several times, but as he watched her use it now, he realized that he had underestimated its utility. The crystal shield enveloped the wooden house, and then it became smaller. The wooden house shrank, as well. A few seconds later, the crystal had become an egg-sized ball resting in the woman's hand. The wooden house was inside it, safe and sound. "Let's go," the woman said. Lifting her lantern and speaking to Han Senator, she turned to leave the island. Such a ruckus. Why didn't the demon spirit show up? Han Sen asked casually as he followed the woman. "I am free. He won't dare show himself to me now," the woman said flatly. Han Sen couldn't be certain if she was telling the truth, so he asked her directly, "Why were you freed so easily? Was this the first time you asked someone to help you?" The woman's hands moved, and the dragon lance turned into a white dragon boat. She sat on the dragon boat and said, "You think Two-World Mountain can be accessed by just anyone? I don't know how you gained access, but if other people could do what you did, I would have been released long ago. You don't know how I got here?" Han Sen looked at the woman strangely. The woman smiled and said, "Is that odd? Two-World Mountain is between two worlds. Although the other woman was my clone, I was unable to interact with her while I was bound. I don't have her memories, and when I was freed, she should have become a doll whose strings were cut. I cannot recollect her memories." "How did you know it was me who saved you then?" As soon as Han Sen asked that, he realized that the question was stupid. The woman still answered, "If it wasn't for my clone, how would you have known that you needed to follow my two-world lantern? And how would you have known not to talk on the two-world path? You really would have died, otherwise." The two-world mountain restrictions had broken, which was what allowed you and the Extreme King Guide to gain access to Two-World Mountain. Han Sen eyed the woman, trying to see if she was telling the truth. Her story did sound rather plausible. He went silent for a while, and then he brought out the stone book. "Your clone said that if I saved her, the bindings of this stone book would be broken. Why is it still closed then?" The woman looked at the stone book and said, "The book has a world print, so it wouldn't open automatically. Even if the book was destroyed, no one could open it. No one aside from me, that is." "Then, can you open it?" Han Sen didn't understand what she was saying, but if she knew how to unlock the book, then that would be great. Without speaking, the woman casually cast a small world print. A stamp appeared on the stone book's cover. A mysterious symbol glowed briefly, and then the stone book's invisible power was broken. The book could now be opened. Han Sen couldn't wait to open the stone book. The words inside the book jumped around as if they were alive. They looked like fairies, and they flew towards the woman's forehead. They all vanished into her eyebrows. When the woman saw the fairy-like symbols, she appeared surprised. And then, she understood. She sat upon the boat, allowing all the words to flow into her forehead. "Oh, **T. I have been tricked." Han Sen suddenly understood. After the stone book's words all flew out, the stone book crumbled into sand that slipped through Han Sen's fingers. The woman absorbed all the words and then smiled at Han Sr. "Thank you for bringing me my clone's memories. You want to know what test the sacred leader conducted, right?"
Han Sen nodded.
The stone book hadn't contained his answer. It was filled with the memories of the clone. The woman was sitting at the front of the boat. She put a hand under her chin and looked up to the sky. The sacred leader was very powerful, but his lifespan was quite short. He would only live a few hundred years. It couldn't be compared to those that could live for 10,000 years, 1,000,000 years, or even 1,000,000,000 years. He tried his hardest to find a way to live forever, even forcing himself through multiple rebirths. But eventually, he still reached his life's end. Trying to stay alive, the sacred leader conducted many tests. Then one day, a man who called himself God came to Sacred Leader. Sacred Leader made a wish? Han Sen looked at the woman with shock. The woman shook her head. No, Sacred Leader was a very self-confident person. If he wanted to achieve immortality, he would find it by himself. He wouldn't make a wish to another creature. Han Sen didn't speak. He listened to the woman, hanging on every word. After so long spent searching, he was finally touching the center of this mystery. The woman sighed and said, Sacred Leader didn't want to make a wish. Instead, he wanted to kill God. But no matter what power he tried to use, he couldn't damage God. He couldn't even ruffle that being's clothing. You can't imagine how shocked Sacred Leader was. He ruled practically the entire universe, and yet, he couldn't deal a speck of damage to this creature claiming to be God. But this self-proclaimed God was also restricted by some sort of power. He couldn't kill Sacred Leader either. But after that encounter, Sacred Leader poured all his strength into finding out what sort of creature that God was. Many things happened, and in the end, Sacred Leader did manage to kill one. What? Sacred Leader killed a god? Han Sen asked, his voice going hoarse as his throat tightened. The woman shook her head. It wasn't really a god. It was more of a statue. It was like a statue that was controlled by God. Han Sen thought about that god inside Destiny's Tower. It was a statue, more of a representation than an actual god like King June. After destroying the statue, Sacred Leader conducted some tests. He discovered, to his shock, that his lifespan had increased when he absorbed some power from the statue. Sacred Leader became incredibly excited, and he thought, if killing a statue of God added that much to my lifespan, what would happen if I killed a real one? The woman smiled. And so Sacred Leader continued researching how he might kill God. But after his statue was destroyed, that God hated him and wanted him dead. Sacred Leader was unable to kill God, but God was also unable to kill Sacred Leader. They were fighting indirectly, so to speak. When the time came for Sacred Leader to actually battle God, all of us were incredibly excited. And yet, at the same time, that began the period of our greatest suffering. Saying this, the woman sighed. Not all the members of Sacred shared Sacred Leader's vision. When he fought with God, Sacred Leader's family, friends, subordinates, and even spouses all betrayed him for God. And they put Sacred Leader in a difficult position. Sacred Leader's research of the story of genes was at a dead end. No one could practice the story of genes, so there was no super gene that could threaten God. And by then, Sacred Leader's lifespan had come to an end. And then God destroyed Sacred and killed Sacred Leader? Han Sen asked. The woman shook her head. I don't know. Before that happened, I was already entombed in Two World Mountain. By that time, Sacred Leader had lost everyone. Sacred was unable to hold itself together, so its collapse was only a matter of time. When Han Sen heard this, he sighed. Sacred Leader was so strong, but not even he could defeat God? That isn't quite accurate. But, at the very least, he let us know that God can be resisted, the woman said. Right. So, why were you sealed inside Two World Mountain? Han Sen actually wanted to ask if she had also been tempted by God and made a wish, but he quickly decided not to. The woman's face changed. With a stony face, she said, That's none of your business. I've paid my debt in full now. I've told you everything, so you can leave. Han Sen's heart jumped, and he thought, this woman was encased in the stone of Two World Mountain. It must have something to do with the demon spirit. That woman carved into the sea demon car has to be her. Han Sen had these ideas rattling in his head, but he didn't try to confirm them. He told her, I have known you for so long, but I don't know your name. The woman looked at Han Sr. What are you hanging around for? Get lost. There was nothing Han Sen could say to that, so he left the dragon boat. When he turned around to look at the woman, the dragon boat had soared into space and disappeared. Where she went, he had no idea. Even in Sacred Leaders, people were already fighting against these things claiming to be God. But it does seem as if God wins every time. Han Sen closed his eyes and continued to think, when Sacred was destroyed, did Sacred Leader die? The sanctuaries were a place for the Sacred Leader to research immortal spirits. The crystallizers later adopted the realm. Why didn't any other races take over the sanctuaries? Why were the crystallizers the only ones who could? Did the crystallizers know the secrets of the sanctuaries? Maybe. The woman said that the crystallizers were tests and that they were very smart. They must have known a few of Sacred's secrets for sure. Han Sen thought about this and then, his eyes brightened. That should mean that the crystallizers continued Sacred Leader's research. But what exactly was it that the Sacred Leader researched? Spirits, beast souls, xenogeneics? The crystallizers didn't seem to know exactly what they were doing. Their bodies were too weak, so they probably wanted to use the sanctuaries to make their bodies stronger. But Sacred Leader's research couldn't have been for such a simple purpose. I have learned so much. I now know the beginning and the end of the story. All I am missing are some of the details regarding the middle. And I also know more about the story of genes now, so that should come in handy for my practice. Han Sen felt a lot of relief, and he thought he was close to getting all the answers he needed. Han Sen looked around until he figured out where he was, and then he started heading back to the White Whale. He had to get back to Bauer. Han Sen soon realized the Tianxia system was way too big. Sticking to one direction was nearly impossible, and there were clouds everywhere he looked. He couldn't even see where he was going. While he was trying to decide which way to head, he saw the shape of a few shadows. Several king-class people were flying through the clouds. Bar. Han Sen was shocked when he saw this shadow. It was Bar. But Bar wasn't with Dia Robber this time. There were people of many different races with him. Han Sen. When Bar saw Han Sen, he looked ecstatic. Everyone sped up to reach Han Sen. Seeing their faces, Han Sen immediately knew they were coming after him. There was a 90% chance they were after him for the Extreme King's bounty. Han Sen hesitated. He activated his Wanjia Rubik's Cube and connected his video stream with the Treasure Identifier Elder. Han Sen, I have been looking for you for so long. Bar rushed towards Han Sen, pulled out his knife, and slashed. Although Bar was a hybrid of the Destroyed, his talents were scarier than most of the full-blooded Destroyed. On top of that, he was practically immortal. As long as his cells were not completely eradicated, he could be reborn through his remaining genes. And each time his body was obliterated, he came back stronger. He was sort of like a cockroach that never died. Bar had already killed many half-deified people who were stronger than him on paper. Han Sen had battled him once before, but he was unable to finish the maniac off. After the Treasure Identifier Elder received the video, the stream was distributed across all media stations. He played the video for all to see. It wasn't a live stream, though. It had been modified by Treasure Identifier Elder and his team before it was played across all the broadcasting networks. There was a bit of a delay so it could be processed, but most people considered it a live stream anyway. Considering the content that the 1,000 Treasures had delivered with their 2 most recent broadcasts, most of the broadcasting networks gave the Treasure Identifier Elder airtime immediately. There had been amazing viewership numbers for the past 2 broadcasts, so this video didn't need to go through the normal approval process. In moments, the broadcast was playing on screens throughout the Geno universe. Tego Geno Fluid. It makes you strong like the Tego. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first broadcasting station in the Tianxia system. Here is the video of Han Sen's capture. The show that was on air suddenly stopped. Many people were angry, but when they saw what was playing now, their eyes widened and locked on the screen. Isn't that Bar from the Destroyed? And Shadow from the Storm? And look, there is Thunder from Thundersnake. They've surrounded Han Sr. He deserves it. He was streaming with the Wanjia Rubik's Cube when he fled. He deserves to die. Bar is going up to him. So powerful. No wonder Bar is so famous. The power in his strikes can destroy small planets. What do you know? That's called the Destroyed God Light. If you get caught in a beam of that light, you or any other creature would just die. You guys don't know *T. The Destroyed Godlight isn't Bar's strongest move. The amazing thing about Bar is his immortal body. He can't be killed. Even if Han Sen does defeat Bar, Bar won't stop coming. Plus, other elites are there as well. Han Sen won't get away today. Everyone was watching and discussing the content. Bar was the most famous member of the hunting party, but the other kings were very good too. Especially Shadow and Thunder. They belonged to some of the less famous higher races. Still, as individuals, they weren't weak. They could easily compete with the best geniuses of most races. Plus, Shadow and Thunder were half-deified. That was one step greater than Bar, so in terms of power, they exceeded him. While everyone watched this, Bar's bone knife suddenly lunged towards Han Sen's head. A scary destroyed knife light shot forward to strike Han Sen. Han Sen jerked to the side, dodging the thrust of the bone knife and throwing a punch into Bar's chest. Good hit, Bar shouted. He then threw his left fist collide with Han Sen's. Pang! 2 fists struck each other, releasing a powerful shockwave. The clouds rose and washed away, as if they had transformed into a tsunami. Han Sen didn't budge, but Bar was sent flying. When he came to a stop 10 meters away, his face changed. Some sort of ice was spreading over his fist, and it moved up his arms to cover his entire body. Bar opened his mouth to shout, but his body became a block of ice before he had the chance. Inside the ice, Bar was in that angry, roaring position. He could make no noise, though. Han Sen shot past Bar, not even sparing a glance at his frozen opponents. He went after the other kings. Shadow, who was of the storm race, came at Han Sen first. Her body was like a typhoon as she surged toward Han's senator. He couldn't even make out her body within the chaos. A scary storm was coming for Han Sen's body. The wind of that storm was like a flurry of sharp weapons that could shred the fabric of space. Han Sen's body was cut to pieces within seconds. Is that all it took to bring Han Sen down? Shadow emerged from her artificial typhoon, and after seeing Han Sen's body in bloody bits, she laughed darkly. The next second, though, Shadow froze. Han Sen's shattered body disappeared into thin air. Shadow knew that was bad, but the realization came too late. Han Sen's face appeared in front of her, and he threw a punch into her belly. Pang! The punch that slammed into Shadow's stomach sent her soaring through the air. Although she had the protection of wind, she was still frozen solid by Han Sen's ice. Before her descent was complete, she was an ice sculpture. Thunder's jaw went slack when he saw what had happened, but he didn't slow his approach. When he got close enough to Han Sen, he used his king area. Thunder and lightning boomed and struck in the immediate proximity, covering all corners of the area. Han Sen was suddenly surrounded by a furious storm, and his body was drowning amidst the thunder. Pure attacking areas were the easiest to deal with, but they were also the hardest to deal with. Pure physical attacks were easy enough if you could block them, but if they were used against someone who was weak to their element, they could be extremely deadly. There was no middle ground against something like this. Inside the radius of that area, there was nowhere to run. Han Sen could only use his own body to fight back what came his way. That thunder area isn't the strongest I've seen, but Thunder himself is half deified. Han Sen, on the other hand, has only just become a king. He can't have moved beyond the first or second tiers. Han Sen won't last long within an area that powerful, a king said as he watched the video. After he said that, though, a hole was torn straight through the thunder area. Han Sen came out from that ocean of electricity with lightning snapping and crackling all around him. It didn't touch his body. Han Sen was holding a spike of lightning. He ran in front of Thunder and tried to stab him with the spike. Thunder was holding a spiral of electricity. He lifted the bolt of pure lightning to collide with Han's senator, but when the lightning touched Han Sen, it looked as if the lightning itself had actually been electrified. He almost dropped the lightning spiral. Pang! Han Sen's left hand punched Thunder in the chest. Thunder was immediately sent flying. His body quickly became another icy statue like the others. In minutes, Bar, Shadow, and Thunder, 3 king elites, had been frozen stiff by Han's senator. They were all shocked. The 2 other kings who had come after Han Sen were shocked as well. They were 8th or 9th tier kings. They weren't as talented as Bar, or half-deified like Shadow and Thunder. If those 3 powerful people had already been frozen by Han Sen, they wouldn't dare compound their mistake by trying to fight Han Sen themselves. They turned around to run, but it was too late. Han Sen flashed by them. Both of the areas emitted by those kings were broken, and they were turned into ice statues just like Bar and the others. While it might have taken some time to describe, in reality, the fight was over in moments. Han Sen managed to freeze 2 half-deifieds and 3 kings in a few steps. Am I seeing this right? Thunder and Shadow, both of whom are half-deified, were frozen? Bar is still frozen too. Are crystallizers really this strong? This is too cool. 1 punch, 1 person. He beat 2 half-deified people and 3 kings. No wonder he was able to murder a prince of the Extreme King. Since when have the bodies of crystallizers evolved with such speed? Weren't the crystallizers heavily reliant on technology? It doesn't seem like a pure, cold power, though. If it was so simple, Bar and Thunder wouldn't be completely sealed in the way they are. The whole universe was shocked by what Han Sen had done. Sealing 5 powerful kings in mere moments was an impressive feat. No one had seen that coming. This guy is getting stronger and stronger. I've got to get better myself, Lin Feng said, upon seeing Han Sen's fight on his phone. His eyes were sparkling as he walked toward a xenogenic-infested mountain. Wang Yuhang had a Ghana woman in his arms at the time, and he was enjoying himself with scrumptious foods and fine wines. Back during the Geno Scroll fights, he had bet all his money on dollar being victorious. That gamble had an enormous payoff, so now he was able to afford many of the things he wanted. That really sees me off. Out of all of us, why is Han Sen the only one who's so famous? No, I need to do a live stream of myself. I want the rednecks of this Geno universe to see how great I am by comparison, Wang Yuhang said as he watched Han Sen seal bar and 4 other people. The girls around him were also watching Han Sen's fight, screaming in glee with every new attack. It soured Wang Yuhang's mood even further. Not bad. He's almost entered my league. If he keeps on working hard, he might reach 30% of my power, Xie Qingqing said. He was wearing dark sunglasses, and he had a bottle of beer in his hand. He was focused on flying his expensive aircraft, but he also had a pen and paper next to him. As he flew, a person's image suddenly appeared on the ship's monitor. It was a worker from the Thousand Treasures Alliance. After seeing Xie Qingqing, he smiled and said, "Boss Xie Qingqing, did you finish your 3rd comic yet? The whole universe is waiting for the threequel to your overbearing president, Love Luo saga." Arg, hey, Arg, what are you? Oh, the signal is bad. Arg, magnetic storm. Oh no, Xie Qingqing said. Then he slammed his phone closed. What kind of artist would hit a deadline and hand their work in on time? Xie Qingqing took a sip of his drink and returned to watching Han Sen fight. In the Extreme King, a ghost-like body was emerging from an empty mountain. It walked into the underworld, traveled through King's Kingdom, and headed for the Tianxia system. I don't care if you are Bai Yi or Han Senator, I'm going to beat you this time, Bai Wuchang said to himself excitedly as he traversed the depths of space. After Han Sen froze Bar and the other 4, he intended to steal any good items they were carrying. A wave of unease washed through him, though. The smile left his face, and he hurled the Wanjie Rubik's Cube away from him. The moment Han Sen threw the Wanjie Rubik's Cube, a needle-like blade materialized from the image display of the Wanjie Rubik's Cube. The thin blade flew right past Han Sen's cheek. A black shadow followed that blade coming from the Wanjie Rubik's Cube. A person grabbed the Wanjie Rubik's Cube and gave Han Sen a toothy grin. "Who are you?" Han Sen asked the weird creature that had emerged from the Wanjie Rubik's Cube. A frown furrowed his brow. The creature had the body of a human but the head of a sheep. Bat-like wings spread from his back. He had scales, and their black color glistened. "I'm Shadow Ghost," the weird creature said, playing with the Wanjie Rubik's Cube as he spoke. The Wanjie Rubik's Cube was still active, and many of the viewers froze in their seats when they heard Shadow Ghost's name. Shadow Ghost came from the pirates. Although he was only half deified, his name struck fear into the hearts of many. Even many deified elites were wary of this being. Shadow Ghost came from a rare race, but his talents were deadly enough to strike fear into many people of the higher races. As long as a video was being filmed in a real place, Shadow Ghost could enter that video and travel to wherever it was being filmed. That was what he did when he came out of the recording Wanjie Rubik's Cube. But that wasn't the scariest thing about him. Once Shadow Ghost entered a video, he could reveal himself at any time without warning. Imagine talking to your good friend or flirting with your lover, and then suddenly, a sword came out of the video chat and skewered you. Not many people could react to the threat swiftly enough to save themselves. God only knew how many kings or half-deifieds had been killed in such a way by Shadow Ghost. Many people were never even aware of how they died. It was pretty hard to prevent. Shadow Ghost is onto him. Han Sen is in danger. No way. How did Han Sen react so quickly earlier? He was holding his Wanjie Rubik's Cube close to his body, but he still somehow avoided Shadow Ghost's sneak attack? Yeah, Han Sen just froze 5 powerful enemies. After that, he should have been relaxed and off guard. But he actually avoided the strike. Did he dodge out of instinct, or did he somehow know what was coming? Either way, it's pretty scary. Shadow Ghost spun the Wanjia Rubik's Cube in his palm. As he stared at Han Senator, he chuckled grimly. There's no grudge between us, and no one has directly hired me to kill you. However, the bounty being offered by the Extreme King is far too tempting. Today, I will have to trouble myself to kill you. Han Sen had never heard of Shadow Ghost, so he didn't know who he was. But seeing him emerge from the video of the Wanjia Rubik's Cube, Han Sen knew what sort of powers he had. You were unable to kill me earlier. What makes you think you can take me on now? Han Sen asked, raising an eyebrow. You think that was all the power I have? Let me show you my real shadow area. After that, Shadow Ghost pulled out another camera with his free hand. There was a loud clicking noise as the camera flashed. Han Sen tried to dodge, but he didn't know where the power was coming from, so he had no idea which direction to move in. After the flash, Han Sen's body simply disappeared. The Shadow Ghost camera displayed an image of Han Sen, but in the picture, Han Sen was able to move and talk. It was like a laptop. The flash had made Han Sen feel as if things were all dreamy and that he was drifting in space. Everything around him was gray, and there was a shadow in front of him that he could barely see. That shadow was Shadow Ghost. Han Sen, look where you are. Shadow Ghost raised the Wanjia Rubik's Cube that was in his hand. The stream from the Rubik's Cube was still running. Han Sen could see the video, which showed him caught in the screen of Shadow Ghost's camera. Han Sen's heart leaped at the sight, and so he quickly tried to fly out of the camera's frame. He kept an eye on the Rubik's Cube stream as he flew, but he soon realized that no matter what direction he flew, there would be no escape from that place. The video stream showed that he was always dead center of the camera's screen. It is useless. In my shadow area, you are just an image. And if I rip this image, your body will be torn just like it, Shadow Ghost boasted. Then he damaged a corner of the image that showed a bit of Han Sen's hair. The moment the image of Han Sen's hair was damaged, Han Sen's actual hair was given a trim. He didn't know how it had happened, but there was nothing he could do to prevent it. The people that were watching the stream felt a chill. They knew Shadow Ghost could enter virtual images, but they didn't know he had a power like this. Everyone felt a chill. If Shadow Ghost trapped them in a picture, killing them would be as simple as damaging a camera. Some of the deified elites who were watching the video nodded in approval. They were impressed with Shadow Ghost's might. Don't worry, I'm not going to kill you. Another creepy smile crossed Shadow Ghost's face. You're worth more alive. I'm going to take you with me to the Extreme King. You might be my best chance of becoming deified. Han Sen was looking at Shadow Ghost, who was outside the image, with an expressionless face. He said, Do you really think you can capture me this way? Shadow Ghost replied with confidence, saying, My area has no limiting range. Furthermore, you are just a king. Even if you were deified, you couldn't escape the boundaries of my area. Really? Han Sen said. His left eye then flashed with a red light, and his body turned into a red shadow. Where is he? Shadow Ghost's face changed. Han Sen had disappeared from the picture. Where is he? The people who were watching the stream were shocked, too. They hadn't seen how Han Sen had managed to get out of the picture's frame. Arg! Shadow Ghost's sudden scream drew everyone's attention back to him. One of Shadow Ghost's eyes was bleeding. It seemed as if some scary power had penetrated his eye and sent a jolt of pain straight to his brain. Han Sen was standing behind Shadow Ghost. His Thunder God spike was dripping with blood. Next time you want to kill me, don't talk so much crap. Han Sen swung the Thunder God spike, flicking away the blood. He took the Wanjia Rubik's Cube and flew away without looking back. Shadow Ghost's body fell through the emptiness of space. It appeared like he had been killed. Every noble watching the video stared in mute silence. Shadow Ghost was a nightmarish enemy, but he had been one-hit killed. The viewers were having difficulty wrapping their heads around the idea. Most of the kings, dukes, and nobles were unable to discern just how Han Sen had managed to kill Shadow Ghost, though. That was what scared the audience the most. Someone who had just become a king had managed to kill a half-deified warrior as quickly as they might kill a chicken or a cow. It was hard to believe. The video stream suddenly went black. The spectacle was over. Many of the viewers were still reeling from the shock, though. They hadn't yet figured out how to react. Han Sen turned off the Wanjia Rubik's Cube and flew forward. He wanted to take a look at the items Shadow Ghost and Bar had been carrying, but he didn't have time. A scary presence was coming this way. Han Sen could sense that if it wasn't a deified elite coming for him, then it was a very terrifying half-deified being. It was most likely someone that he couldn't compete with on his own. Of course, not long after Han Sen flew away, a shadow appeared where Han Sen had been. That person looked at the dead Shadow Ghost and the frozen Bar. He waved his hand, bringing out a sword light. He used it to break Han Sen's ice, freeing Bar and the others. Once Bar and Thunder were freed, they caught sight of the new man and began to tremble. Lando, Shadow, from the race of the storm, screamed. He looked frightened. "Were you guys fighting Han Sen?" the person called Lando asked, his voice stern. "Yes," Shadow answered. He was very scared of Lando, but he still answered truthfully. After hearing Shadow's answer, Lando chased after Han Sen, his body moving so fast that the space around him seemed to groan. "I can't believe Lando is here. No matter how strong Han Sen is, that is one opponent that he won't be able to escape." Thunder finished his statement with a very long sigh. The traitor that the dragons hate the most. The inverse dragon Lando might not be deified, but he has killed enough of them. And they were deified dragons, of all things. A guy like him can't be dealt with by a king. Shadow's mood had mellowed somewhat. There are many elites in this universe, and there are many half-deified elites. But the scariest half-deified in existence has to be Lando, Thunder said. After a moment of thought, he went on to say, "Although the half-deifieds of the Extreme King are powerful, this guy could fight an entire generation of them. If I had to pick an enemy, I would prefer to choose a half-deified of the Extreme King over Lando. Lando is just too evil." Even Bar looked shaken. He wasn't scared of anything, and he would go anywhere. But aside from deified elites, there were two people he feared: the inverse dragon Lando and Yushanshin of Sky Palace. If it was anyone else, he'd chase them down to the ends of the universe. Either that, or he'd kill the person right where they were. But after seeing Lando, Bar had yet to say a single word. He just watched Lando go after Han Senator he didn't dare follow. "Han Sen is dead," Bar said to himself. Then, he flew out of the Tianxia system. He no longer planned to chase Han Sen. Han Sen flew through the clouds at full speed. He kept changing direction, and he erased his scent and trail as he fled. But still, he couldn't shake the entity chasing him from behind. Han Sen could also feel that whatever was pursuing him was gaining. The gap between them was closing. When Han Sen finally reached the edge of the purple clouds, he saw someone emerge from the clouds behind it. The being was coming his way, and it was coming fast. "One of the dragon?" Han Sen murmured. The man's dragon horns were particularly large, but he didn't have wings. He looked like a dragon hybrid. Han Sen was unable to shake the dragon's pursuit, so he stopped running. Lando came to a stop directly in front of Han Senator. Instead of striking, he just looked at Han Sen and asked, "You are the Han Sen that the Extreme King want? Would you believe me if I said no?" Han Sen smiled. Lando nodded. "Then come with me." "I could certainly come with you, but could you at least give me a reason that I should follow you?" Han Sen said without moving. Lando laughed. "I'm Lando. That should be reason enough." "You are Lando?" Han Sen was shocked to hear this name. Because the factions of the Geno universe were so competitive, many people had been bribed by their enemies to betray their race. Some would become proper traitors, whereas others would merely become spies who carried information. Lando was the most famous traitor in the past few decades. When others became traitors, they usually just sold classified information. But Lando had the gall to cut off the head of his master, who was a deified dragon. He gave it to the ruler of the destroyed, who used it as a chair. Inverse Dragon Lando's name was known across the universe. When dragon culture was discussed, his name always came up. His actions were a shameful stain on the honor of the dragons. The dragons had wanted to kill Lando for a long time, but Lando might have been the greatest half-deified to ever exist. And he always worked with extreme caution. The king of the destroyed protected him, as well. So far, the dragons hadn't been able to touch him. Knowing this story, Han Sen looked at Lando's back. The man had no draconic wings. Lando was a pure dragon, but when he killed his teacher, The dying man had managed to tear off his dragon wings. They had never grown back. "Will you come with me now?" Lando asked in a gravelly voice. "I'm not sure if I believe all the legends about you, but no matter who you are or how strong you are, I have to test your mettle for myself," Han Sen said. "Right. If I was you, I wouldn't believe the stories about me, either. It's a shame that the Extreme King want you alive. If they didn't, I wouldn't have to go through all this trouble," Lando said. And then, he moved. He tried to grab Han Sen by his head. Han Sen didn't retreat. He sent his full power into Jade Skin. His body became like ice, and he threw his own palm against the hand that Lando had extended. The dragon's clutching fingers tore through the fabric of space, but Han Sen and Lando's hands were both bounced backward. Jade Skin's ice power hadn't been able to seal Lando. All dragons had a high resistance to every element, and of course, Lando was no exception to this rule. The next second, their fists collided once more. The bodies of the two had become deadly weapons. Their fingers, palms, fists, arms, elbows, legs, and knees moved too fast to track. Neither of them would take a step back. Rather than releasing their power, the fighters exchanged blows of raw physical power. Even that was enough to strain and stretch the fabric of space. Catcha! The bones in Han Sen's fingers were unable to withstand that next scary hit. They broke. Han Sen's eyes widened. His jade skin made his body very strong, and although it was only at the first tier, his body was as sturdy as a half-deified's. Lando, however, had been able to break his fingers with a random punch. That was a disturbing amount of power. Lando's fists kept coming without reprieve. His eyes were perfectly calm as he unleashed his attacks, but his fists flew like a raging fire. Every punch took Han Sen's full attention. Han Sen's jade skin let out a groaning sound. His arm bones cracked under the next hit, and still, Lando did not relent. The dragon wasn't attacking Han Sen's weak spots, though. He was making sure to only strike Han Sen's arms and legs. "Is this guy going to break all my limbs to drag me back alive?" Han Sen looked at Lando's face, and he became certain that he had guessed correctly. F***CKU. You're so cruel. Han Sen knew that his jade skin was too low level. If he had an 8th or 9th tier jade skin, he might have been able to fight against Lando. But right now, he was too weak. If this continued, Lando would completely shatter his arms and legs. The bodies of the dragons are so scary, but their true talent lies in using evil breaker powers, right? Lando is so strong. Perhaps the tales are true. Han Sen's chest was growing tight with tension. He used movement abilities to fight with Lando. Guys like Lando, who favored raw aggression and violence, usually didn't develop a very sophisticated movement set. Lando had a very powerful body and amazing strength, and he could usually beat his enemies outright. He wouldn't have to study his enemies before engaging them in combat. But when Han Sen started to use his movement abilities, he noticed that they didn't benefit him much against Lando. It turned out that Lando could also move pretty well, and in that high-speed magical fight, Han Sen didn't have a single advantage. He had to fight Lando on even footing. After a few more hits, his arms felt as if they were about to break. Pang! Lando's fists came down on Han Sen's arms like hammers. His jade-covered arms had sustained too much damage, and cracks spread across them. When the final blow landed, they were completely broken. Lando's unstoppable fists flew forward to clobber Han Sen's chest. Han Sen's chest exploded like water, but the splashing water drew itself back together and reformed. His wounds recovered very quickly. The original Water King body wasn't as strong as Jade Skin, but its recovery speed was much better. It was quite useful, after all. Lando didn't keep attacking. He looked at Han Sen and said, "You either come with me now, or I turn you into a cripple. You live up to your reputation, Lando, but that doesn't mean I want to go home with you." Han Sen blinked and said, "How about this? Your body is so strong. Yes? If you can withstand 3 of my blows without falling, I will stop fighting and let you take me back. Even if people come to save me, I will not run." "Sure." Lando agreed to the proposition without a second thought. "You're a very determined man." Han Sen gave him a thumbs up. "Go ahead then," Lando said coldly. "My 3 hits require some time to prepare, but in the meantime, I can't deal with your constant attacks. We have a deal. If you fight me before I finish my 3 attacks, then you lose, Han Sen said. Strike, Lando said in an emotionless voice. His face was wholly unmoving. That means you are agreeing. Take my first hit, then, Han Sen said. Then, he gathered up power in his fist. Jadeskin was running at full power, and he used the yin-yang blast method to strike Lando's chest. Lando remained where he was. He didn't dodge, and he didn't run. He allowed Han Sen's punch to fall on his chest. The punch was silent, but Han Sen had woven his scary ice-sealing power with the yin force. It drilled right into Lando's chest to freeze his organs,